Darkness. Darkness, everlasting. These are the words that would come to the mind of one inside of a coffin, had one been inside for what felt like an everlasting amount of time. They are not, however, words that would come to mind had one entered a coffin the correct way, being deceased, or had the coffin dweller entered such a state by being Iron Maidened with extreme malice. Had either of these things happened, one would neither hear one's coffin's barehanded open wrenching nor feel the kind sting of twin fangs sliding into a dried husk of a neck. But one might feel the blood rushing familiar into their veins, the quickening pulse, the lifting of slumber's haze from their mind. Frankenstein's monster opened his eyes and gasped the gasp of a kid jumping out of a swimming pool. I'm alive, he roared victorious, before sputtering handfuls of dust from his mouth. Overstanding his coffin was a mysterious figure who seemed to be a shadow-given form. He was the dark consumed by it, though the truth was more mundane. Black wrappings, extraordinarily tight, bound him from head to foot, concealing even his face. And then over that was a cape. This cloaked and wrappy stranger bore a lantern, the glow of which skewered the eyes of revived Frankenstein for a moment. As the vampire blood flowed, however, his eyes quickly, superhumanly adjusted. Above him was no mummy. The black wrapper fell with a practiced shrug of the visitor's arms, landing in a coil among the 1,000-year-old sand. His condition required that he wrap himself so, to withstand Egyptian daylight, for his ears were lightly pointed, his mustache was long and silvery, his eyes were a heavy crimson, and his teeth were triangular. "Greetings, my dread Frankenstein," he said. "My name is Count Dracula, and I have come for you." Memories of the exhumed monster's old life pounced upon him. "Do not befell me with that name. I curse the name of Frankenstein," raged he. "I would sooner suffer 1,000 deaths than bear such a name. I beseech thee, never call me by that name again." "But it is accurate," Dracula debated, keeping calm. "You were born into this world by the hands of Victor Frankenstein, which should legally deem you the son of Frankenstein, ergo, a Frankenstein. Or, more accurately, Frankenstein Jr. Blast you and your logic and have a heart, stranger. If you wish to associate with me, I have rightly christened myself with mine own name, which you must come to know, and once you have known it you shall rue ever identifying me in any other fashion." Dracula grinned. "Well, tell me." "My name," the unnameless man declared. "My name is hitherto to be known as Adam. My loquacious friend Adam," accepted Dracula. He continued with a sweeping bow. "Good evening, and welcome back to the world of the living." Setting the lamp by his feet, he reached into his plentiful cloak, and retrieved a hand mirror inlaid with millions of dollars worth of precious gems and golds. "I know you detest the sight of yourself, but stay your nerves. It is important that you see the man you have become after more than a century of soper." Adam peered in the glass and recoiled from shock. There was more to him now than the parched skin, matted hair, watery eyes, and dark lips, he remembered. Now he was patched with papyrus which, unlike the wrappings of the everyday mummy, concealed him selectively, hiding the tracks of stitches. Upon his head sat a golden headdress in the make of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh's, a conical cylinder with an orange disc attached above the brow. And most alarming of all, his dried flesh changed before his eyes. Gray faded to pale tan, and his newly embloodened flesh grew firm and succulent like a dry sponge dropped in a bucket. His canine teeth suddenly sprinkled onto the ground, replaced just as quickly with sharp, carnal fangs. Immediately his reflection began to fade. "My mother," exclaimed Adam with a start. "What manner of transformation has occurred within me?" Another memory, torchlit, broke the surface of the lagoon's edge of his mind. A memory, one in which Van Helsing and his assassination squad cornered him in this pyramid, long, long ago. With little strength and nowhere left to run, he was pushed, finally, into a wide-open sarcophagus, and slammed shut inside, crushing whatever riches or refuse had remained within. "My hypothesis as I became a man of science long ago," Dracula declared, "would be that from the day you were sealed within your container, you began a slow process of fusing completely with whatever shared the coffin with you. In short." He replaced the mirror within his cloak. You are become Ozymandias, ancient lord of the Egyptian sands, as well as vampire, by my fangs. You would do well to recall your reflection, for this may be the last time you ever see it, a cheap price for resurrection. And now do well, as well, to follow behind me. I myself would do well not to lose you in this tomb labyrinthine. The pair made their long trek up through the ancient tunnels. Scaling steps, Adam relished in the stretching of the joints. His body, he found, was far lighter than previous. And could his fingernails possibly have been sharper? And, for some reason, his palms were growing thin bristles of hair, which were not altogether that nauseating but still less than gusting. I do apologize for the palms, Dracula said. That is one of the few negatives of becoming a vampire, but you will adjust to it quickly. They are quite good for polishing shoes, I assure you. But Dracula, why do you restore me so? Questioned Adam, following diligently behind. What use could I, a cursed demon's pawn, for my creator must have been a demon to create such a terror as myself, have in this world? I am still such an unsightly wretch as to ruin everything and everybody I love. Tell me why I, uncomprehending, should not turn away and reconfine myself to this underworld for the betterment of man. The doorway drew closer with each fateful step. Though it was evening, the blue that now entered the pyramid's hall seemed to have a friendly glow. And that skyline gleamed with starlight, not only of white, but also of sparkling red and blue. The pair stepped closer, crossed the threshold, and "Welcome, friend, to the year 3001. We have you surrounded," boomed a loudspeaker. That was no tranquil glow, it was the light of squad cars bathing riot gear. Who should alight on Giza this night but a full 100 officers ready to spring a trap? Whose squad cars, being futuristic, hovered over the sands? Whose allies, being snipers, set sights from helicopters high above, whose copters had no rotors, being futuristic? Who waited armed with helmets, shields, nightsticks, and rifles with tremendous muzzles? Who had muzzles themselves, being, as they were, werewolves, shaggy soldiers with keen fangs, keener ears, and a strong desire to bite criminals down to the bone, metaphorically, as they were civilized? And riddle me this, how could werewolves, a super pack of snarling werewolves, have assembled at all when the moon was not full, when the moon had long since been massacred by careless space miners? This moon lived on not just as space debris, but also in pieces which circled the heads of every last patrol wolfman. The full moon whirled about every helmeted head, in miniature. Each one was a sphere of utter perfection, entirely full on any night of the week. Or even every day. Dracula, a criminal wanted across the globe with a great bounty on his head, had been followed. Yet here he was in the pyramid's exit, grinning at Adam like the village simpleton. "Welcome to the year 3001, he shouted, as if this were merely Adam's weary birthday party. "Surrender now, Gore, or we will use lethal force." Gar. 3000. The number rolled from Adam's tongue and tumbled into the abyss-like lagoon of time and despair that still represented his mind. Empires had risen and fallen in the years he'd slumbered. Oh brave new world, that has such furred people in't. You are speaking of the werewolves, yes? Dracula casually indicated the crowd. That's right, raise 'em high, the speaker boomed. The same goes for your friend in the hat. Hands up or you will be shot, ARARAROOO. With the same whimsy, Dracula said to Adam, "We do as he says for now, my friend." "How dare you, my fair vampire," decried Adam even as he raised his hands aloft. "You revive me, only to seal me away in yet another dungeon? Be'st thou blind? They will us to prison." "Fear not. As a creature of the night, I have many powers," said the up-handed vampire gentleman. "I sup on the blood of humans and werewolves alike. I leave no shadow, no reflection. My strength is that of several soldiers, my gaze pierces the will, and I can not only compel bats, wolves, and men to follow my command, but I can become the bat, become the wolf, become the man." He flashed his fangs. "And become the wolfman." All at once, he became an undead top, spinning with such speed he kicked up a veil of dust and produced a distinct drilling sound. Adam, yet and still uncomprehending, knew only that the werewolves readied their guns. All officers. Concentrate fire on Dracula. Repeat, bark bark bark. My companion of the night, shrieked Adam to the whirring blur. Keep thine eyes on thine prize, beware the danger at all angles. I leap for your life. And he did, leaping into the line of fire. With a single simultaneous click, a deadly crosshatch of pink rectangles issued from these their future guns. Lasers. But the mummy felt no ravage of light, only the safe thud of his body on earth. He scrambled to his knees. Not a scratch or burn on him, but how? The answer lied in the thick cloud of stirred-up sand surrounding him and the instillant Dracula. I neglected to mention, hummed the Count. Whirling sand is perfect for absorbing rays of light. The shimmering clouds fell to earth, uncovering his person. And his person was now werewolf in form. The searchlights bouncing off mini-moon hordes fed him more than enough lunar light. His present aspect, brown-furred and moist-nosed, was bizarre to Adam. Logically speaking, his hair should have been silver. Oh, and as well, if I run around in place at sufficient speeds, it awakens the werewolf's blood within me. Adam gaped. Great Scott! And now if you will excuse me, though, you are free to accompany me if you wish. And with that, the lupin Dracula bolted into the crowd of cops with the speed of a gale. Most officers raised their riot shields, but one, a new recruit on the very front lines, was scared witless. Oh no! Here he comes, he gulped. Even the mini-moon round his head was shaking. Dracula, running with his cape raised like wings, made a bat line for him and disappeared. Watch that shadow, the loudspeaker howled. But Dracula has no shadow, you say? You're right, he was the shadow. In this form had he slipped into the crowd, become as the sand beneath their feet, and cast aside those feet, flinging soldiers left and right. Helpless as pups in his wake, they banged into riot shields and shattered squad car windows. Adam watched goggling as the shadow vampire cleaved through, leaving a tunnelish path. Then a pink stripe burned past Adam's chest all too close, and he followed the vampire, choiceless, breathless. The senior officers knew all too well what was transpiring, and they had the perfect counter. One shouted, "Men wolves, I mean. Track him." We practiced this. They had to stop Dracula's clear, now predictable path of destruction. One brainy mass of troops, in a whirl of shields, bunched together at just the right moment, catching his shadow like a snake in a cage and, as a bonus, Adam too. Now frozen, Dracula had no choice but to rematerialize. "Gurses," he growled. "This bodes a little less well for me." "All in the circle, AIM," advised the loudspeaker. "Mostly for Dracula." "Hell." The shields turned aside and the muzzles came forward. "Adam, I have one more techniques to share, one that is guaranteed to astound you. You have watched me shift to werewolf shape, watched me melt into shadow, now watch again, if indeed you can believe your eyes." They shot their guns. He snapped his fingers. Dracula, sire of the eventide, disappeared, and as Adam ducked, the laser rays crossed harmlessly through thin air. Commend the soldiers for their aim. During one sublime moment the beams intersected in perfect asterisk. They had not missed, but their target was, for he had become mist, particulate moisture. As for the disruption that ensued, thank none but Dracula, ruler of gloom. Every laser hit the hand of an officer, and the pain was so great that they needed to shake their smoking hands and blow on them, after flinging their guns backward a full 100 meters. A squad hovercar's driver, a lieutenant close to panic, raised his wrist communicator and commanded, "All hands. On guard. Stay calm, wait for orders. He's gone into an invisible werewolf state." Rookie cops yelped with fear. The lieutenant added, He's missed, guys. Just look for air that looks kind of damp." A wild scream cut him off. The cops around his car were collapsing into chaos. "Oh no, I meant don't look. He's using the evil." Everywhere the wolves broke ranks and ran screeching. Adam held his position in the bedlam, crouched under the tramping boots that, momentarily, forgot him. The lieutenant yelled, "Shut your eyes, I say." But his men and women mobbed his car, as though he were foe. Suddenly one comrade opened the door, tossed the lieutenant to the rabble, and snatched the wheel. The lieutenant gawked. "Goodness sakes, officer, have you gone mad?" The burglarizing hound turned to him with a deranged look in his eyes, and said, "Yes." Then he stomped the gas and rocketed off, straight upward, into space. At least the rotor-lacking hovercopters high in the sky were safe, probably. "All personnel be warned," cried a sniper with a loudspeaker. "Dracula is using his evil eye while invisible. To avoid brainwashing, please capture him with your eyes closed." His vehicle was knocked to the sands by 3 rogue squad cars, landing with a poof in a soft, but regrettably distant, dune. The 9 other copters, by 27 cars, met the same fate. Was the crouching atom defenseless, or were his instincts at the ready? As unruly police wolves scattered like ants, one crafty team, with their wits still about them, sought the answer. The most daring member stealthily creeped behind Atom, stopped her own head moon in mid-orbit, and with it smashed him in the back of the head. He reeled, falling to his side. "Blazes," he cursed. "Pile on." The team jumped onto his back, their heaping bodies pressing him into the desert. He struggled and winced. Though his strength was massive, their mass was stronger. Dracula, witnessing this, cried out. He could not be seen, could not be located, he was crying out from seemingly anywhere. "My friend. I will assist you shortly. Struggle lightly if you can." Somehow he was found. A large net was thrown from a squad car. It draped gently over a person-shaped patch of air bullseye. In that instant, the craze of the wolves was smothered by a hush and stillness. They wiped their eyes, and became exultant. "We caught him," marveled the squad car driver, he who had cast the final trap. "We got him with the bat net." He and 5 passengers left the car and jigged victoriously. Swiftly, Dracula melted into mist and deflated the net, leaving 3 generous holes. That's when the wolves stopped their dance, opened their trunk, and initiated stage 2, the humongous pet carrier and the cordless blow dryers. Their warm gusts blasted him into his new home. Dracula revisibilitized behind bars. Curses. Myself, foiled. "Let's get them into custody, Wolfrybody," said the loudspeaker cop from earlier, who had just finished his return trek from a soft dune 2 kilometers south. Rather than risk removing the wolf pile to take Adam away, he decided to play it safe and call an Egyptian forklift company. "We have not lost yet, Adam, my fellow in vampirism," cried Dracula as 2 officers began the slow and cumbersome process of lugging him away. "I have fallen, but I still believe you can get up." "How, I beseech you, how?" inquired the vampire mummy with muffled voice, which Dracula could hear with his monster hearing. "How, when you are done? You, who have the powers of all manner of magic, yet have fallen to Lupin forces. I am not even a candle against your heat and radiance. I am nothing but a mere Frankenstein's monster." His dried tear ducts manifested tears. "You have spent your entire life running," said Dracula. "From your creator. From hunters. Even from Mary Shelley herself. But this is a new era, for the world just as much as for your very being. You are no longer the same Adam you once were, even a casual glance assures me of this. I may have the blood of the wolvie with me, but there is a juice running through your veins far richer than my own aristocratic plasma, that of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Ozymandias." That flicked a switch inside of Adam. He truly was anything but the man he used to be. Now, in fact, he was 1, maybe 2 more people. Dracula roared, "It is the era of Adam. You must do the chasing from now on. Spread your vampire wings and fly." And the wolf pile burst asunder. The mighty Adam rose and roared with a savage fury not seen since the year 1818, and the orange sun disk on his headdress roared too, with relentless flame. "Hirua! With my left hand, I invoke the name Ramses." And that hand he raised, with fingers curled. An infinite brightness erupted from his headdress, drenching the sandscape in yellow-white. The many myriad moons of the wolfmen shattered, perishing under such concentrated solar strength. The mobsford forms untransmogrified into the human shapes natural to them. Some were fat, some were skinny, some were tall, some were short, and all horrified. Thus Adam retroactively realized a curious thing: every werewolf had looked the same. Their pelts had been the same shade of brown, their muzzles had maintained the same length, and even their heights had stood at precisely 5 feet 10 inches. Even stranger, they were less afraid of Adam than of seeing their current skin-covered selves. "Don't look at me, guys. Turn the werewolf back on. Don't look at my fleshy face." Adam had rolled back the clock to pre-werewolfinization days, revealing their old human faces with this light, a ghastly mirror. Now every last wolf, plagued with shame, cowered behind any and all available cover. Their faces were hidden by helmet visors shoved down, by shirt collars tugged up, and even by the sand, ostrich style. Dracula watched bemused. The light died down, revealing that he had phased mistily through the pet carrier and reclaimed his human shape. Good thing sunlight passed harmlessly through mist. Now he leaned coolly against the carrier's bars. So much for being a mere candle, he chuckled in astonishment, but the real astonisher was yet to come. Adam's papyrus tracks began to move on their own, the shorter ones merging to grow longer, the longer ones miraculously multiplying. They made circles along him, as if these his wrappings were paper coils. Then they, like so many snakes congregating, moved to the top of his headdress. But this papyrus did not simply drape down and waft in the wind as party streamers. Rather, it became even longer until all the tendrils reached the sand, where they strengthened and steadied themselves. Like a hut's roof, they surrounded him, save a gap in the front, for enemies to see his face. The paper snakes raised Adam a little, holding him inches aloft. Now they were his feet, or, rather, his slithering serpent tails. His eyes burned with the fury of the Egyptian summer sun, with a vampire in it. A vampire wearing SPF 5000. He declared, "With my right hand, I invoke the name of Dracula." And the 6 papyrus tails glowed with blood-red writing, not hieroglyphics, but Vrolok over and over again, down their whole lengths, as if by magic. Officers behind riot shields peeked at their peril. "Oh no," one said, "that means vampire in Slavic." Then finally Adam cried out, "Wolfman, I am Adam." He threw his right hand before him, thus commanding dozens and dozens of the wraps to rush forward and to weaponize. Their tips spun into the shapes of sharp fangs, just like the teeth of a vampire. Operating on their own limited sentience, these snakes fanned out and pierced the necks of all the officers, who, gasping, were too boggle-minded to move. Then Adam bent his fingers. Swiftly, and with the sound of many small children with bent straws slurping the last drops out of soda cups, blood was schlepped through the bandages, and it traveled their lengths into Adam's body. After a mere 2 seconds, the deed was done, and the dozens of foes all fell into an anemic nap, due to recover by next morn. The last of the copters and squad cars crashed in Giza's sands, which, again, were famously pillowy. Just as Adam with his left hand had crushed them all in daylight and released them into night, so now did his right hand free them from a strangledom of wraps. The papyrus tail set him down, and all the other strips bolted back into place, into Adam, their king, their tape measure. Adam had won. But wait, he was struck with fright. Was not Dracula allergic to sunlight, as in all the myths and vampire tales? "Fear not," assured Dracula, returning to his side. "One might suspect that the light of the sun would reduce a man such as myself to dust, and that it does, if my flesh is too strongly or too longly exposed. I cannot remain in misty form for long, but 5 minutes a day has been more than enough." With a wink he added, "I do try to avoid sunburns as best I can." "And thus have I saved my savior," laughed Adam. He inhaled the air of a liberated man. Now he was free, free of loneliness, of helplessness, of sarcophagi. He truly was a vampire and a mummy, and a Frankenstein. Technically. "The night may be young, but I say we have had too much excitement," Dracula reckoned. "Come. Let us take our leave and have respite. There is still so much work to be done, and so much to tell." Where, pray tell, shallst we be headed for? Inquired the curious Adam. My house, my home, my aircraft and my pet. Come, Bistritz. Not far away, an enormous and, come to think of it, conspicuous sand dune wobbled apart and revealed a gigantic castle in 14th century style, built to perfection save its utter lack of windows. It was borne by a truly titanic vampire bat, to whom the dune was naught but a little dust to shake from his back and furry head. The valiant vampire strode over. Dracula gave Bistritz's chin a hearty rub and chucked 3 strawberries into his mouth. I raised him from birth with special techniques. He is not only a loyal friend, but also my castle Dracula, undetectable to radar. Let us enter from the sides, much faster, note these stairs. Bowing and showing the way, he said, I invite you into my home, my fair Adam. Those were the words Adam had wanted to hear for almost 1,200 years. There once was an American governmental institution known as the White House. Alas, by the year 3001, cultural tastes had risen and fallen, and the people had voted for a remodeling. As such, it was now the Brown House, and shaggy with furs. In an oval-shaped office, its walls lined with moon rocks in commemorative cases, a wolfman sat at his desk. He stared up and ahead, watching a screen built into the wall above the doorway, a routine transmission from the moon's remains, plus news flashes, and stock prices racing along the bottom. Mr. President, sir. The wolf looked down. There in the doorway was a stateswolfwoman in shades and a sharp suit. There was, aside from clothes, no physical difference between them, but she did speak with a British twang. It appears that Dracula has been spotted in Egypt raiding tombs. Ah, Dracula, the president sighed with what definitely sounded like a French brogue. My old friend. The sarcasm was bitter, and forgive the pun biting. Beneath his muzzle sat a name plaque reading, President Igor. Tell me, Alice, how is he doing? Bad, Mr. President. Obviously. Her tone was level, despite the gall of her words. You may outrank me, but I feel the need to put my foot down this time. Given recent affairs in the Brown House, he has to have something planned, and as for what it is, I have pardoned the expression a hunch. As all who had read Igor's memoir knew only too well, his immaculately backed wolf form concealed his human self's hunched spine. Give me free rein and I'll sniff him out, and put him away for good. I have always had faith in your survival instincts, Alice. But why, pray tell, should I let my head of defense run into harm's way to track down a single vampire? We are not looking at a single vampire anymore. The situation has turned into vampires. The president's expression hardened. Do you mean to tell me he's revived a mummy from ancient Egypt? Alice unfolded her paw-like hand to present a small floating future technology screen. It showed a miniature mummifier assisting the world government's public enemy number 1. I have reports from officers stationed near Giza that he hasn't gotten just any mummy. It's Frankenstein. You don't mean, with the bolts in the neck? Sir, do you see any bolts? She said. I don't see any bolts. An honest mistake. Get back on topic. After you. Alice didn't miss a beat. This creature destroyed a squadron's mini-moons in one blow with the power of the sun god Ra. Allegedly. That's Horus. Horus was the sun god. I know, she said, laying a hand across her forehead. It's nonsensical and I hate it. You see now why I must end this. Of course, he said with a dash of sympathy. You are certain you can arrest the man who has run from me for 1,000 years? It would be a wonder if I couldn't, Aru, she swear-held. She took her leave triumphant, but stopped short to turn back and ask, just double-checking. Are the world delegates still slated to meet with you at the end of the week? Igor smirked. Which world are you asking about, exactly? Bistritz, the magnificent castle bat glided through the night sky, ever heading for parts ever darker. His condominium-sized wings needed only flap once to guarantee an hour's worth of flight. Truly he, and the castle on his back, constituted the most impressive home in the world. The monstrous friends would soon dine within this bat's hallowed halls. In a posh dining room was seated Adam, duly amazed. He enjoyed a roaring fireplace and the sight of a mystery staircase from his position at one end of a meters-long table. On the walls were hung medieval relics, swords, and banners which predated even he. But the piece de resistance waited on the table, where an exquisite cornucopia offered plentiful fresh fruit. Adam's side screamed with ham sandwiches, Turkish delights, roast beef, turkey legs, an entire ham, string beans, chicken pot pie, robber steak, a spiced ham, and a coffee cake. Never in all his days had he seen so much food, much less in such garnished array. Dracula's side, far at the other end, was barren, by contrast, of plates. It was also barren of Dracula. But not for long. All down the table's length, from Adam's end to the empty one soon to be Dracula's, standing at attention, were cups of wine, wine for vampires, which would be blood. As Adam sized up his food, a strange yet familiar mist passed slowly over the table. Any wine it passed, it slurped, saying slurp, and schlierp, myumyumyummy. Soon the cups were empty, and Dracula, full, materialized, sated from sip in his seat. "What a delightful meal," he said. "I used to do this trick on battlefields, you know." The act had made Adam nervous. He inquired, "Are you most definitely sure you do not want any of this extravagant, overlarge meal you have graciously prepared? Do not worry about my well-being. You have only just started your baptism of blood, which is what we call the first stage of vampirism. While I do not need to sup on much supper due to my more advanced condition, I acquired food as well as blood in case you would, in fact, like to sup. So sup away, I have sipped, and will sup on your presence alone. Then surely I shall sup." So sup he did. At intervals throughout, he turned, with his mouth meat-laden, to the spaces on the walls where windows should have been. "So I notice that your castle is close to the outdoors," he said. "That it is. In case I have need to protect my condition. And what of the steps by thine fireplace?" A carpet-clad stairway of mystique led up to a tiny deck. When Adam leaned, he could clearly see that deck, complete with an old-fashioned sailing vessel wheel, poised behind a grand circular window. From that window's girthy width and tallness, one could see all that lay before Bistritz in the sky, possibly including the sun. Without it, how could I steer my bat? Ah. But of course. Yet more supping ensued. "After consumption of the second pork dish, I wish to thank you from the bottom of my heart," said Adam. "Quite again, there is no need. It was my pleasure to exhume you from beneath Egypt. Not for that. For this most delectable selection of dishes, the likes of which I could have only dreamed of. For I have spent a life subsisting on nothing but roots, fruits, and wild brutes, and this meal is the most scrumptious I have ever had in my long and yet short life." "You do not need to consume it all just to show your appreciation," Dracula advised. "I have had a long life in which to practice the culinary arts with few to enact my skills upon. In fact, by the end of our friendly relations, you may be apt to reject this sup with anger." "Why should I want to rescind this supper? Has this something to do with your reason for retrieving my unhappy corpse from the sweltering sands of the North Sahara?" Dracula, a mite less playful, reached beneath the table and lifted a bottle of red wine, true wine, that being the blood of grapes. "Do you sip wine with your sup?" "I should say I desire a sip, please." He tossed the bottle. It sailed over the cornucopia and, with the perfect landing of a gold medal gymnast, landed tilted against the rim of the wine glass closest to Adam. The cork popped off as if by command, the cup was filled to the ideal volume. "My thanks. Do you sip?" "No, I neither sip nor sup. And now, my books." Dracula flicked his arms like a ninja launching dangerous stars. Past his shoulders sailed two books, straight from the dining room library. One landed in the coffee cake, the other against the wine glass, which knocked the bottle off the table. "Drat. But please inspect the volumes." Adam, who with his fork had just hoisted the entire spiced ham, lowered it sadly and turned to the first novel, Frankenstein. "What manner of volume is this?" I apologize for recalling bad memories, but please, verify the ending for me. A quick inspection afforded the conclusion to the novel. Victor Frankenstein passed away in the far north aboard a sailing vessel, and Adam himself forged a funeral pyre at the very tip of the world to burn himself to death, at least, such had been the intent. This is a real account, said Adam. And examine the second. Bram Stoker's Dracula. That account was invented, they say, Dracula prefaced, by a man who lived in Whitby, England, when I had come to roost there. They call it a fable, an assemblage of fabricated memoirs from the various heroes involved in my slaying. But in truth, this Mr. Stoker looted real journals and printed them under guise of speculative fiction. He scoffed. So it is the genuine article, accurate down to the letter. Adam flipped to Dracula's end. A Romanian mob found his coffin in the forest. His macabre seat of slumber was pried open, his chest pierced with a common Bowie knife, and his body became dust and scattered in the sun. Also, his head was removed with a cookery knife. Very impressive. Beheaded as well as staked through the heart. Adam fact-checked. Dracula drew an X over his heart with a finger and chuckled. Do you think a common dagger owned by some random Englishman is guaranteed to be made of silver? It simply must be made of silver, or a vampire will not pass on. Otherwise, if we are substantially harmed, we simply revert to ash, blow away in the wind, and are reborn as the phoenix, only more bat-like. Fantastic. But why this exercise in literary history? I have waited many moons to ask you this, my friend. The heckish host loosened his collar and took a long breath. Several meters away sat Adam, who might have been perfectly content if not for his memories, some of them vicious, others yet vague and awash in ominous mist. Dracula leaned forward and asked, "What happened after the end of Frankenstein? What was your fate?" It certainly was not a happy doom, nor one as exciting as burning to ash. Nor did I succeed in returning to the ashes from which I crawled in my loathsome genesis. For you see, I did hold to the promise I made the sailor that frozen day. I took myself to the pinnacle of the iced wastes, carrying kindling which I had procured at the start of my journey. Then I set them all ablaze and laid myself in the pyre. I let the flames overtake me. I held under the northern lights for an eternity of pain. And my nerves savored every second, every minuscule particle of that flesh-rending time. It was a banquet of suffering, but I deserved every serving. For it was I who rampaged through Europe, I who murdered Victor's brother, his friend, his wife, and even Victor himself. And yet no matter how long I remained on the pyre, my body, harbor of my sins, would not burn away. By next morning, the kindle was utterly spent. I examined myself. To my utter shock, though my flesh continued to scream with anguish, I myself was unseared, unmarked. I was not only naturally cold-resistant, immune from the day of my creation to frostbite and pneumonia, I was also too tough to burn. I long considered seeking death through other means, but ultimately lacked the resolve to do so. Instead, I slowly returned to the land of the living, and right after that, you were seen by the monster hunter Van Helsing, initiating a lengthy manhunt that spanned the planet, I presume? Ah. 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 Yes, I shall confirm that, yes, that is what happened most indubitably, Adam confirmed incredibly credibly. There was a strange, sad truth he could not reveal, that he scarcely knew himself, which smarted at the touch like a new wound. And how did you know, oh correct one? The host brandished a thick stack of highly yellowed pages, tied with twine. Even with his vampire eyes, Adam still had to squint to see it, thanks to the gargantuan length of their fabulous dinner table. This, said Dracula, is the manuscript to the unpublished work Frankenstein 2. It may as well have been a treasure map leading to your formerly final resting place. If not for your would-be killers, he explained, fondly remembering the recent jaunt which already made him wax nostalgic, I would have never revived you. Prodigious, Adam gasped. Such an incredulous series of events, both fortunate and undash. Dracula then tossed him a copy of The Invisible Man. It curved wrong and flew directly into the fireplace. Then it burned up. Whoops. Looks like we will not be reading that story. Adamitis spiced ham. My legend begins in the 1930s. It took merely a few decades for my ashes to reconvene and comprise this form once more. Recalling my previous death, I decided that rather than restricting myself to the Transylvanian lands and relying on world-dominating servants, I would follow my dreams and become a globetrotter, sampling the blood of different nations. This was the old, wild Dracula, not the domesticated sort that I have become of late. I happened to be sneaking around in Wales when I received news of a peculiar death, that of a certain Larry Talbot, who had been saddled with a werewolf's curse. On a lark, I decided, I want to suck his blood. So I did, making the journey to the university, inspecting his body for postmortem study. Sneaking in was no issue, imbibing what little blood remained, a delight. I even discovered that consuming werewolf blood temporarily bequeaths some measure of werewolf power on the drinker. This may be a little technical for you, but the effect is not unlike how drinking wine raises one's blood alcohol concentration. Indeed, one might even say there exists a blood werewolf concentration. Thus I became a treasure hunter, a ghoul gourmand, seeking odd individuals anywhere and everywhere so that I might sample them and their powers for myself. But to my growing shock, for many years I had little success. Even more greatly shockingly, I was soon to learn that the most astounding human beings on this green earth are in reality the weakest. Not the most beautiful, either. My ramblings took me to the French monasteries of Notre Dame. A favorite haunt, the aged architecture of France has always made a fine treat for the eyes. I explored its churches, which, with their rampant Catholicism, are thought to be the bane of all vampires. Well, know that a cross cannot hurt you if you do not look directly at it. Ha! And again, ha! One morning I found myself in an unkempt room of a cloister owned by the resident monks. They were raising an orphan, who rarely left that hogsty of a room. The mess, however, was books, sweetmeat for the mind. I eyed the charming things, trying my best to leaf through not a one as the orphan boy slept. Believe me, the literature's temptation was great. I knew well of the Grand Library by Bistritz Esophagus, which comprised much of history and philosophies, but the volumes this orphan possessed were exclusively of the scientific variety. My mind was transfixed by one book left open, the pages of which explained how to sap energy from a mere potato. Could tubers truly contain such heavenly powers? Could the mechanical extravagances of the age have all stemmed from such simple vegetation? I was completely astounded. I had to read more. Before I myself knew it, I had turned the page and even a boy just awakened, rubbing his tired eyes, could dimly see my monstrous hand and the tome it cradled. Such a simple mistake it was, to forget my place. Straightway the boy pointed and cried, "What manner of devil are you, foul ghost? Release my book and be done with this house of spirit." To which I responded, "I am no spirit, sprat." I stepped out from the shadows and loomed above him, making grand display of my prized teeth. What an unfortunate son of faith he was. A quick examination proved that he had a hunched back like no one would ever believe. I almost thought he were the offspring of a dromedary camel, how humped was his back. And the first thing he did when he saw my fangs, poor urchin, was leap from his bed to kneel before me and beg for his own demise. For his peers had forsaken him, and even the monks his fathers scorned him, claiming that his back was as crooked as his sinful heart. Ashamed, rejected, he had cast himself into worldly studies, sequestered sorrowful in that tower of grey. His pitifulness was too utterly great to bear. I decided to take him under my cape. Thus Hunchback Igor became a vampire and Vlad Dracula became a man of science. Ours was a wondrous relation, I the itinerant count, he the young ward. A shame that our team-up terminated with a titanic shift in world politics, but let me continue. What I did to Igor on that fateful morning, as I did to you also, was inject, through my impressive dentals, my own blood. He became immortal, just as you and I have. With infinite time all to ourselves, we set about making eternity as interesting as possible. I am still proud to say that my protégé turned me into a true Renaissance vampire. We learned all the disciplines of every prestigious learning center in secret. Only with Igor's help did I breed dear Bistritz. Igor was my candle-bearer on the path of transformation from vampiric killer to vampiric inquisitor. We had many wild adventures, many indeed. One moonlit night in a Romanian grove, we were caught unawares by a hungry werewolf. We subdued him, however, without issue, and sampled his blood. Normally I would have slurped such blood hastily, but Igor convinced me to take it to our study. We isolated the blood-borne virus responsible for a particular strain of werewolfism, coaxed it to reproduce, and Igor claimed its powers as his own, injecting himself with ichor of lupe. He was perhaps the first human in history to willingly, permanently become a wolfman, and I joined him. Then we held a spectacular feast, toasting the increase in our powers as well as our shared bounty of knowledge. In hindsight, that night spelled the beginning of the end for our friendship. I believe that Igor's heart is quite noble, even to this grave day, and I can scarcely believe that such a fine wolfman vampire as he would allow our world to grow so corrupt. But I must backtrack, for you know little of this, young Ramses. Indeed, one great mystery remains in this tale: what compelled Igor to take his heart and intellect to the polls as the first inhuman president? How came he to champion werewolf rights, eventually uniting this planet under the banner of a new, all-encompassing werewolf cultural identity? Dracula, curious about his guests' comfort, stretched to peek over the table cornucopia. The mummy was fast asleep among empty plates. He was flouting a primo vampire rule: always sleep in your coffin. Fortunately, every room inside of Bistritz was a little long and featured 6 sides ergo, coffin-shaped. However subtle the added corners, they seemed to do the trick. Perhaps my monologue has run a tad too long, Dracula reasoned, wearing a wry grin. He traversed the tableside, reached his friend, and lifted him from the chair with ease. You must still be groggy after your 1,000 years of sleep. Let me guide you to a more proper rest. Before you wake, we shall have arrived at another friend of mine's abode. And so the big bat soared, far above the clouds. Futuristic wingless jet planes cruised hundreds of feet below, none the wiser. What remained foggy in Adam's memory? As he slept, he began to know, but only with the logic of dreamers. It was some moment of utmost rejection of hope and trust turned to fear of Babe's eyes, twin jewels of innocence, the two things in this world which should have given him a chance for what new babes of monstrosity? Yet the babe screamed. The babe screamed, catalyzing a chorus of cries that issued from his own body, tearing at his papyrus-covered seams, disparate voices, half-human faces straining at his flesh, screaming reminder he was Adam amalgam, disparate parts collected from graves and given what was never their due, new life. Adam awakened in a sleeping coffin which was, itself, in a coffin-shaped sleeping chamber. He was convinced that several hours had passed since the magnanimous dinner. Outside, though, it was dark. He did not know this, for his present bedchamber had no windows. All around stood slate walls, with a conspicuous hexagonal make, and classy electric lamps. Hanging in a prominent position was the portrait of some old guy. According to the placard, he was Dorian Gray. Adam rose shaking, but the details of his dream wafted away, taking with them the knowledge of why he should shake. So he straightened, assured himself it had been nothing, and strode to the door, and called down the hall, which was a seemingly never-ending corridor of manifold suites and fancy carpet. Dracula, my benefactor, where art thou? Right on cue, the Count stepped into view, from one of many audiobook rooms. Good morning, or, rather, good waking, he greeted. I am pleased to see you well. Your complexion is looking quite strong, and there is a brightness in your eyes. I thank you, but I dare ask, whose portrait is that which sits upon the wall? Oh, that is from an art auction. It is of no consequence. I wish to inform you that to your right, said Dracula with a motion to a door inside of Adam's room, is your personal ablution chamber. The basin on the floor with overhanging knobs is the shower area, and is used for washing. By twisting the knobs, you can regulate temperature. The small brush is for brushing one's teeth, it is known as the toothbrusher. I know that new technology may frighten you, but please, if nothing else, smear a pustule of paste on the brush, and brush. When you have prepared yourself, please meet with me in the foyer. You will not lose yourself, I trust, as I have placed helpful road signs along the way. This morning we meet a friend of mine. Haha. Morning. Adam said, what means your chuckle? Is it still night? Has this future gone so mad that it has done away with time itself? Not at all. We merely followed the night. Igor trained Bistritz well. My home ceaselessly circumambulates the earth, always plunged in darkness. The windowless walls, you see, are merely a precaution. Adam raised a trembling hand to his face and stammered, why ye gads. This steed is capable of tracing the world in a mere 12 hours? Then his temper became festive, well then, burn my briskets. What a thoroughly unfounded era. But tell me, what is Igor? A soft drink? Dracula, smiling, shook his head. In due time, my friend. Adam thanked his host and proceeded to ablut. He took extra care to shampoo his papyrus wrappings, that day they smelled faintly of strawberries. All the while, Dracula waited by one of the more ostentatious castle exits, occasionally consulting his holographic pocket watch. Eventually, his guest jogged in with a new question. Yet before we leave, I must have inquiry as to your motives, Adam notified. Is there in truth some foul design entwined with mine resurrection? Mayhaps a tumultuous capture of the world and its peoples? I give you a resounding no, my friend, the Count answered with a jot of solemnity. I have selfishly involved you in my search for allies. I shall divulge further details when I have assembled both you and our third member, but for the present I will tell you only this, I am on a quest. He paused for effect. To save the world, he concluded. The ostentatious front door swung open, and a drawbridge lowered for a full 30 seconds. Bistritz had landed long ago on the midnight shore of an island Galapagos. Soft Galapagos breezes poured in to greet them, and Galapagos turtles scuttled across grass which, sprouting from sand, billowed harmonious. In the emerald trees sat piping Galapagos finches, whose famously varied beaks had played in Igor's Darwinian dreams so long ago. Now, of course, their beaks were even more astoundingly varied, some needle-thin, others hammer-shaped and larger than their possessors' entire bodies. Far in the distance, on a rock sublime and dark, a Galapagos penguin, its bill barbed and massive like a harpoon, bounded into the crystal ocean with a happy splash. The Count and his guest stepped out onto stir steps that stopped in the coolest sand Adam had ever known. He said, and where, pray tell, are we? The Galapagos Islands. Dracula hooped. Bistritz's head, mere paces away, gnawed on one of the many pineapple trees endemic to the Galapagos Islands. He paid the monsterman no mind. A limbless Roman statue, though gorgeous, can only offer a hint of its former glory, and thus takes on a melancholy aspect. So too the moon, floating ruin, which hovered high above, higher even than Bistritz could reach, a little misty in the refracting light of its millions and billions of particulates, was but a sad allusion to ancient Artemis. Crumbling beauty. Its main body now was naught but a crescent, and reckless dynamite had strewn rubble about it in an asteroid ring. This wretched loon remained in sight until it was underpassed by clouds of leaves, for Dracula and Adam had taken foot through Galapagos trees. With their footpath the visitors, immersed in airy humid, traced the ebbing, tide-like, sandy grains, until, arriving at a wide lake, they halted. There was a gurgle of water, the coo of Galapagos fishes. Dracula took a knee. He lifted a small stone, beneath it lurked a circular red button. He said to Adam, brace yourself. And he pressed it. A horrible three-tone trumpet trill sounded from what must have been the island's very core, affrighting every animal for a mile around. Gallopagin birds fled, fluttering in chorus. Adam gave a start, but, seeing Dracula unflapped, remained in place. Actually, Dracula looked a little annoyed, for though this was their ally's doorbell, he found the sound irksome. He jabbed the chime twice more, and the same tinny trumpet blared, grated, self-interrupted. Adam briefly attempted to undo the stitches surrounding his ears. Finally the lake trembled, shaking loose droplets by the tens of thousands. The tens became hundreds, and monumental splashes spluttered free. A quaint house straight from an early American suburb, complete with white picket fence, rose from the depths, its kindly kelp lawn groomed to perfection. There was some manner of man on the porch, rocking in his rocker, smoking with his smoker, which means pipe. What rose from his smoker, however, were bubbles, for he was a moist old man, so moist that he was a fish. He waved to the duo and gasped warmly, "Hello, Drac, old boy. Both, you, come, right, in." And Dracula said, "Meet the only man older than I, Robert Fishman." They stepped into his home, making sure to close the picket fence behind them to be decent. The inside was quite as you or I would expect from watching black and white television reruns, except in color, and also, Adam had never seen reruns, therefore he felt stupefied by it all. As the old friends chatted, he broke off, walking about the family room in a slow spiral of discovery. "I have never in all my years seen such an abode as this," he mirandade. He looked to a digital clock. "Such a strange candelabra." Then to a rabbit-eared television set, on whose screen a Lupin man discussed tossed salad and scrambled eggs. Gads! What playwright could direct such minuscule men? Shakespeare too? With a flash that put stars in poor 19th century Adam's eyes, the screen changed. A new werewolf was there, on his fur a suit and incongruous cowboy hat, in his teeth a toothpick. "Don't take chances," he said through a sheen of static. "If you see something strange and you think it's a Dracula, call me. Call my monster hotline." At the bottom of the screen flashed a series of 25 numerals. How baffling, that seemed as useful for making calls as a bucket of fish and chips. With a groan, the monster hunter hoisted a laser blaster, a tool larger and meaner than the rifles Adam had seen, a metal hulk hoisted onto his shoulder that easily dwarfed his torso. Then he aimed it and the mummy man gasped. The bazooka, charging with a power glow, was aiming through the screen, for the space between his eyes. The glass screen splintered apart. Just kidding, but I could have fooled Adam, who had hit the deck with soldier speed, ears shut, panting. No damage was done. The laser whine had been confined. The wolf rasped, "Keep our families safe, roof roof." Then he, like all specters of the television, disappeared, leaving nothing but a warning to sizzle in Adam's head. Werewolf world. Felicity from the Countess host had heretofore wrapped him like a protective blanket. But should he ever enter the werewolf cities, they would know that he looked like that he was. Suddenly he became aware of the Dracula on the couch and the Robert in the kitchen. "Oh, please excuse me," he said, and he rose only to crouch, only to shrink into himself. His face, gross visage, inspiration of many a pejorative, was hid between his fingers. "Mr. Fishman, sir, please forgive me. Please my face, my habits, they are disgusting to behold. I thank you for accepting the likes of me into your home, but I do not require you to pay me mind." He must not have seen Robert's face clearly from the porch. An amphibious hand slapped him on the shoulder. It was the hand of a grandpappy comforting a sport-playing boy who had missed the big ball, just that one time. Less metaphorically, it was the hand of a green fishman whose entire body, lumsome face included, was coated in a thick suit of scales, and then again in a business suit, though this was not, forsooth, a part of his body, he had simply put it on. "Hey," Robert inhaled. His voice sounded neither decrepit nor weakened, but came haltingly forth due to a wound sustained long ago. Rather than a Galapagonian accent, he maintained a perfectly generic American one. "Me, no, what, like? Having, face, only, fish mother, could, love. You, welcome, anytime." Holding out twin glasses, he added, "Pink, lemonade?" Adam brightened. Even the lemon itself is pink in this unforgiving world. He ceased his cowering and stood to take his glass with aplomb. "My gratitude, Mr. Fishman. Never before have I met with one so accepting of my appearance, except, well, yesternight. It, happen. Rare, but, happen. Wouldn't you, say?" Robert motioned a glass in Dracula's direction. "Yes, most truly, and no thank you, Robert my friend," declined Dracula. "Oh, right," remembered Robert, "saving, special, stuff, 4 you in fridge. He tromped back to the kitchen and took a medical blood bag from the back of his Frigidaire. Universal donor, just like you like. Many thanks, gracious fishman. When Robert returned, the senior vampire retrieved an 4 from his cloak, stuck one end into the bag and the other into his mouth, then held the bag aloft as he sucked. This is the stuff right here. Sakes alive. Adam gasped through a lemon sip. Even icicles form in cubic shapes nowadays. Adam settled on the couch, across from Dracula, as Robert claimed the reclining chair. Beside them the television babbled. No, why, here, Robert stated seriously. Not interested in join anything ridiculous. Dracula settled the empty blood bag on a TV dinner table. He folded his hands. My future phone messageogram to you was brief, he expressed. You have no idea what my proposition to you will be, only that I intend to discuss it face to face. Not doing this, Robert declined with delicate firmness. It been millions of years. Me lived since Devonian period. Me see rats size of sheep. Centipedes foot long. Now see man that become wolf. Change just part of life. Me want no part of this. Me respect you, Dracula, but want just live apart from humanity. I know well the story of the last time you fought man, narrated Dracula. Scientists invaded your Amazonian territory time after time. Shot harpoons at you, set you aflame, as happens to myself in every motion picture. In their last assault, you were taken into captivity and made to mutate, to grow the lungs of a human. Now, not only do you swim in the water and run on the land, you have expanded your culture, learned of man's creations. You have adapted to the experience. This fine home would not be yours without that mishap. You have even taken the time to learn all languages. Every tongue known to man, said Adam, impressed. And every known to animal, added Robert. Plus, became vegetarian. Tofurkey, amazing. Would one last odyssey into the world of man not expand your horizons further, said Dracula. At least give me the honor of stating my mission, old friend. Robert groaned and begrudged, but he breathed, go on. I plan to arrange a group of 5, maybe 6 individuals outside the scope of war humanity to stage a revolution in the coming days. Well, not a revolution, per se. We are not taking over the government, though one may think I desire to restore the world to its old and human shape. That would be as inconceivable as rolling back the rock to the Cambrian era of your childhood, or to the iced ages of the Ice Age. I have made peace with this wolfy world, formed though it was by the forcing of werewolf disease upon almost every living soul. But there is still a world to save. You know what has befallen our beloved moon. Me weep every time me see her, mourned Robert as he sniffled through his gills. Mankind, destroy, millions, years, moon, just, for, resources. So, sick, me, plant, trees, just, so, block, it, from, sight. And that is far from the only resource farm in space, Robert, but what I came to discuss is sadder by far, Dracula spat, becoming unnaturally, over and above supernaturally heated. Tremendous changes are coming. Changes that could affect yet more billions of innocent souls. In the wake of these words, Adam shivered terrifically. He felt himself sucked in like blood through a tooth. Then issued from Robert a hushed gasp. Don't mean tell me, he stammered. That's right. We have to save the world. The other world. The Count leaped to his feet and hurled a manuscript from his cloak onto the coffee table. The cover page read, Government Plan to turn all aliens into identical werewolves. It appears, proceeded Dracula, that extraterrestrials have long noticed the ever-scattering light of the moon and its ever-changing mining practices. Like a twisted beacon, it is summoning them. Recently they decided to send delegates to meet with Igor and his cabinet to establish relations between planets, but the world government is plotting to infect the visitors with the werewolf virus. The Earth government is going to make the ambassadors infect all the aliens and turn them into werewolves, too. Adam cried, "Oh my God." Robert clutched his chest in shock, for right then and there, he suffered a heart attack. Fortunately, he had 5 hearts. He sputtered, this, truth? Examine the ledger if you wish. Every word in there was pilfered, but the contents are complete and utter fact, signed off by the president himself. As I said, I have come to terms with the way this world has changed. I dearly miss the ways in which mankind used to appear in all shapes and sizes, and find the identical wolf shapes to be immensely dreary. But this is what humans wanted. It is a crime to force this change onto a world that may not even contain wolves. Robert flipped through, skimming it all at hyperspeed with his superior fishman reading ability. When finished, he picked the pages up and crunched all 350 of them in his palm like a napkin. This, legitimate, he concluded. Plans, in making, many years. Don't, like. Dracula settled his arms behind his back and cooled off. You still have your old sense of justice, he said with heavy admiration. We have approximately 5 days to gather our forces. All I need to do is meet with Igor and convince him that what he is doing is unsavory. We drifted apart many, many years ago. I am still the most wanted man in the world because he fears what I could do to his empire. But he is still like to me my son, and to him I pray I am a father. Robert chuckled grimly. You, pray? Every man does when he truly needs to, came the reply. Then Dracula turned to his mummified accomplice. That is the true purpose of my quest to revive you. I am guilty of not having revealed this in a timely manner, but as an apology, I offer a route to safety. If you wish, you may leave this dire plot behind. I will deposit you anywhere in the world you desire. I will educate you about vampirism, about how to endure an immortality submerged in darkness without ever sacrificing the high life. Now that I think of it, with your sunny mummy powers you may tolerate sunlight. But should you resolve to come with us, and protect a world you have never seen from a world you do not know, I shall protect you as leader until my last blood-soaked breath. Had Adam stayed awake the night prior to hear about Igor, to learn how seamlessly he navigated life as dual werewolf and vampire and as president, no less, he may well have asked Dracula to set him up straightaway in the same way. All he knew, however, was that society had never meant hospitality. He laughed uproariously. Ah, you old bat, you forget, he cried. Indeed, I could leave your service and run in fearful flight for all my days. I have drunk deep of that life. No more. Here in this home, I feel more accepted than I have anywhere else in my storied history. Even the blind fled me, tripping over their foreign objects. I sit before you thinking of the world's perception of me, scrawled second-hand by the sailor adventuress Mary Shelley. Yet by week's end, he said with great warmth, I may not be merely in fiction. We all may land in the history books. So it is settled, Prometheus. Dracula deemed. He whipped an arm from his cloak and pointed 2 fingers to the 2 figures. So we have here assembled 2 braves renowned the world over for strength, that is, if you still possess, fair Robert, the muscle to overturn automobiles? Most prodigiously, the manfish confirmed, curling a bicep. I shall fill out the team with 2 specialists, one with knowledge of the arcane sort, the other with a speed yet unmatched in all the world, this world, at least. And the castlebout was off, his sights set for bully England. Few, perhaps, would call Stonehenge a magnificent monument. Impressive and worthy of preservation? Indeed, but a wonder of the ancient world? Dear reader, can you be induced to believe that in the far-flung year of 3001, far-flung, of course, from decency, of all our contemporary 7 wonders, none but the pyramids of Giza were preserved? That the others rotted in relative unknownity, non-carity? Oh frivolous age! Thereby was Stonehenge upgraded to a world wonder, being one of the few surviving ancient works of any caliber. But tourists rarely came. All who saw Stonehenge left saying, "So this is the best they could do? Stacked rocks? Wow, cavemen really are stupid." They also said, "Wonder of the world?" More like wonder who in the world thought this was a good idea. Then they also said, more like blunder of the world. So the humble minor wonder was disgraced, as were all the stupid ancient cave people. Irreverent towns lurched closer and closer, and Stonehenge, like an earthworm without even the strength to wriggle, cowered. Soon, those towns would be cities, and the henge on earth would be as a worm on the sidewalk. Tonight, at least, the cities, in their gloom procession, had not yet mussed the stones. Standing by the monument, one could indeed see towns on the periphery peeking above woodland trees, the buffer of plains barely holding. But at least they still were humble towns, their people recently, only 50 years back, compelled, by force of law, to wear wolfenize. These people, relative rustics as they were, did not even notice when Bistritz landed in the clearing, his head touching the base of Stonehenge, his tail, nubby, poking the trees. He dozed. "I see around me a set of monolithic stones," monologued Adam, with snake-like path weaving through said stones. "Some stand straight up, others appear to have fallen. Still others stand atop two more, making rudimentary stone arches, henge-like in shape." He laid a hand on one and stood transfixed. Such a curious structure, he mused. Whatever could it be? Dracula and Robert stood together nearby, under an arch of rock. "They call it Stonehenge," explained Dracula. Robert said airily, "Ah, me, remember, when they build this." "Really? What was it for?" "Me, forgot." Robert's focus lapsed, he tumbled eyelong into the glittering sky, and the desecrated moon. One of its satellite submoons, a larger fragment, happened to explode with dynamite at just that moment. "Oh, such shame," whimpered Robert. "What happened, you only thing I always known." Then spilled forth tears as salty as the ocean. "I know, don't it just bring an old tear to your eye?" "What the heck? Who said that?" The men looked left. The men looked right. Then they looked down. It was a black cat. "Yeah, who were you expectin', the Easter bunny?" she mewled. She commenced pretend carrot-eating sounds. Adam joined them in wonderment, though of a somewhat different character. "What be this?" he said with a swallow. "Witchcraft and wizardry?" She continued to make pretend carrot-eating sounds. "Don't be superstitious, pardon me, actually you are correct," Dracula self-checked. "My female feline friend, the name is Count Dracu Dash." "Garlic farlic babarlic," chanted the cat, and as if by magic, an orange cloud of garlic essence exploded into Dracula's face, by actual magic. "Bleh. Bleh, bleh," he retched. "My special eyes." He fell backward into the arms of his friends, swatting furiously at his face. Adam gasped, "Dracula, my compatriot, what has happened?" "Ugh. It seems I was careless in my survey of the next person of interest," he coughed. "Do not worry about my health. Garlic is no vampire bane, merely incredibly irritating. Rather, set me down. Allow me to recover. And look ahead." He pointed at the amazing cat who ran away with fleeting feet. Adam yelled dramatically, "Oops." He and Robert laid the count down. A rock was his pillow. "Quick," cried the fishman. "Catch that cat." And they were off, the twosome scrambling to their feet, the onesome feline perched on an arch, looking down persnickety. "I bet you can't keep up with me, fish breath," she joked in the voice and manner of a washed-up comedian off the Las Vegas Strip. "Why, you felon," roared Adam. He stopped to raise his right arm, commanding a mummy wrap to extend and reach for the cat. "Double double bubble," she spelled. A thick, soap bubble-line barrier surrounded her. The wrap ricocheted off, merely popping the shield. "Huh. I bet you really want your mummy." "Wouldn't be so irate if jokes not so lame," growled Robert, who, despite his fatherly charm, had never loved wordplay. Too bad, can't you stop me, she puffed. He swore and rattled his fist. Me, don't rearrange words. She retorted in her stupid guy voice, haha, then try to catch me, okay, caveman talk. Then, rather humorously, she catapulted herself from the arch. Then she ran into the woods. Robert took off with even hastier feet than before and cried, cavemen were respectable, POPE. HRM, said Adam, tottering on behind. This doth become increasingly awkward. That dastardly cat bolted into the woods, disappearing in twigs and trees, but Robert and the dry guy were not so easily deterred. Ducking under branches, stomping over logs compared to the cat, these two were graceless and far too heightful. Adam surged ahead, but despite all his speed, he could not keep his eyes on her. He saw legs one moment, a tail the next, and at last only a formless shadow. With a rustling of leaves, Adam broke through the forest. His first concern, the black cat was missing. Impossible, surely they had followed her path immaculately. His second concern, before him was the village, a cobblestone street lined with houses, mailboxes, swan's neck streetlights. Fear struck him, stilled him. There were no people about. It hardly mattered, there was a threat of people. If none were hunters, that mattered not either, he feared the normal person most of all. He turned to see Robert rolling and stumbling to join him. Mr. Fishman began to shout, but then, with a compassionate look into Adam's eyes, stopped himself. You, turn back, he whispered. Now, when I have gone this far? When it is these werewolves that I have sworn to confront? Well, if you ready. Robert got down to business, as was symbolically communicated by him rubbing his hands together. Where would cat go, in city? A catty shriek from the east answered his question. Looking down the stony road and clumps of houses, Adam cupped a hand around one ear. Now that he focused, he could hear a whole jumble of voices coming from that away, some human, one feline, many from across the animal kingdom. What rabid zoo? There be my test, said Adam. The duo ran east, keeping to the edge of the forest so its kind leaves might conceal them. Soon they came to a park with a great loud gathering. So this explained the absent streets. It would be no surprise to learn the entire town had congregated here, their mini-moons so close to one another that they nearly scraped. Nor was it inconceivable that the entire contents of their woodlands and farmlands was here, for in the hands of every werewolf was a struggling animal. Not all of this tumult could be seen from the trees, but Adam could see enough: 2 wolves pushing a grunting cow, hissing squirrels grabbed by their tails, as if they were a banana bunch, beetles by the handful. Had the townsfolk come to show their livestock a local monument, the ancient tree trunk labeled Old Stakey? No, for they had a new idol, a metal box 30 feet tall and 30 wide, and 30 in the other dimension. People thronged at both open ends. What marvel they were seeing within, neither Adam nor Robert could tell, for they remained on the edge, in the shade, peering through. Then the crowd broke to let a fellow werewolf stride in, one who was dripping wet and holding a sack that thrashed. The fish and mummy could see it now. What stretched through the box was a conveyor belt, onto which the bag was emptied. Floppy fish streamed on, though some waggled off into the grass. The others were conveyed beltly into darkness. Robert looked away. Heard of this, he whispered. Then the metal box word rattled, briefly thundered. And a message arrived on the black screen it bore, and the message was repeated by a stilted, electronic voice from within, brown hair with pointed ears. Soft plops came from the box's exit, and a deafening siren blared. A bright red X adorned the screen. One person began to clap, but most seemed disappointed, hanging their heads. Adam distinctly heard one townsperson say, "Ah, shoot. Guess we can't have those anymore." Robert, he whispered, though I watch as intently as I dare, I still do not understand. Those fish rejected. Failed werewolf test. Adam gulped tremendously. I dare not ask what becomes of them now. Well, actually. But his words floundered under a sudden torrent of noise. Now the people sent creatures through the box at rapid speed. Rushing to the belt of conveyance, they tossed in their squirrels, rolled on their goats, one even placed, as gingerly as could be done, an ant mound dribbling with dirt. The great box gave them X after X after X, all while the rejects piled up at the other end. This pile rose higher and higher, clear above the heads of werewolves and haunches of bulls. Adam watched as one pig too many rocketed off the belt and into the center of the animal mound, causing the whole collective to fall with a squelch and a solid echo, like bowling pins. The werewolf scattered and howled, rightly fearing the avalanche, and in that fear, the hubbub around the box paused. The fallen hill lay where it was, sulky, despite the fact that most species do not have tear ducts, and thus do not sulk. What animals remained untested puffed and squirmed. Then someone cried, "I got that cat." Someone else cheered, "Woo." A stony-faced werewolf marched up to the box, holding a sack that writhed, meowed, and yelled. Applause followed, gentle, but rising. The wolf grabbed a black cat out by her scruff and, ignoring her swats and hisses, tossed her onto the conveyor. A sickening lump rose in Adam's gullet. That familiar cat, too slow now, squirming and scrabbling to her feet even as the conveyor moved, could not escape the decision rejection of the great judge box, but when she fell, Adam would have to charge into the crowd and catch her. He crouched like a runner on his mark. The machine echoed, brown hair with pointed ears. But no plips or plops emerged from the box, nor did the red X sound, just a dull, doof noise. The background snorts of animals, and the grumbling of werewolves denied their show. Anger rippled through the crowd, and grumbles became mad barks. One wolf kicked the box, but another held him back and cried, "Settle down. It's not the box, that pesky cat just got the better of us," as if by magic. "Ah, not again." The barks lowered again. Adam blinked, processed the scene, and finally relaxed, wiping his brow with relief. The miraculous cat had saved herself. "I'd have to be purty stupid to let myself be caught, that easily." Adam and Robert whirled around. When had that cat, with her green gold eyes, gotten herself on that rock behind them? They paused, as though this meeting were a standoff. Then the two men dived and she disappeared, went up in smoke. Old cat, old trick, and two stooges earnest enough to fall for it. Dracula's friends had been strung along from the very beginning. When that black cat first entered the forest, she rattled off a spell which created 1, 2 doubles. The spell for this was not bubble gubble double, but the less intuitive fake me lake me crake me. Eventually, slumped in defeat, Adam and Robert would rejoin Dracula at Stonehenge. In the meantime, the chief vampire laid on his back, watching the skies through irritated eyes. He said, "Ho-hum. The majority of stars weren't stars at all. They were aircraft, or spaceships, and their patterns were erratic, fast or slow." The more Dracula tried to focus, the less he could see. He did notice several spaceships constantly pausing to back up, over and over, which was excruciating, because when you're flying you can just steer back into place. It's not like you're parking, man. You're in outer space. But rather than cry over the disruption of the constellations, Dracula chose to accept it. Progress cannot be taken back, after all. "Looks like warmed-over kitty litter, doesn't it?" said a newly familiar voice. That is one way to describe it. The cat was back, without her hunters. She sat down right on Dracula's chest and stared into his face. "So," she said, "what brings you to Stonehenge, Drac? Even the felines have heard of the vampire." "Well, what, did y'all think I throw garlic into the faces of everyone I meet?" "Yeah, wrong. I just prefer to have conversations one-on-one. Rather than one-on-some. I understand the feeling at times. Listen, I have heard of a cat with a storied past living in these parts, and just had to beg your assistance." "Maror," she meowed in lieu of him. "As king of the night, I seek an audience with the man who did this to the night sky. But to fulfill such an impossible task, I need people with special talents." The cat gasped with excitement, and her eyes grew as if she had seen a sheep-sized rat. "Are you going to make him fix it?" "I plan to stop him from doing the same to another moon and another planet. What are you, kidding me? She barked. Why should I go out of my cat schedule to help some bat save some aliens? What have aliens ever done for me? I understand that this may be much to ask for, said Dracula, staring into the cat's eyes, his heart genuine. In your lifetime, you have faced far too many trials. You healed with witchcraft in the 16th century, and for thus intervening in the lives of countless humans, pets, and woodland creatures, you were burned at the stake. But you managed, by the skin of your teeth, to send your spirit into a cat. Townspeople grow old, but you live on, returning to this circle to renew the magic vows. You may try to live apart from humanity, to encounter them only as you please, but look, the forest is peeled back further and further into nothing. This ancient stone circle will not hold for long. Now, if you were to ask why you should help me, subjecting yourself again to the world of humans, I could not give you a proper answer. There's a but coming, isn't there? She said. Correct. If you can bother with my silly whim and my coup is successful, I still do not believe I can give you back the sky of your youth, but I do happen to enjoy the flying stars, mind you, said the cat as she lightly leaped from Dracula's body. Their colors are nothing like the white stars. A little closer to the Christmas-time lights I see when I travel into town. They're gorgeous. Dracula pondered this, nodded, and said, then I supposed it is no great loss to keep those where they are. Ah, look, you may like this. He pointed to the sky, and the cat turned to see. A satellite, due to a server malfunction, had just caught fire and was hurtling down through the Earth's exosphere, due to splash and simmer in the ocean. From here it looked like any star or ship, only it was a jot brighter, glinting warmly. The cat reared up and swatted at it again, and then a third time. She would never swat it. To regain the diminutive dame's attention, Dracula pushed himself into a proper sitting position, faced her, and, insofar as he could, bowed to her. But I can give you the moon. She settled, and chuckled. Really, meow. On my pride as an immortal vampire, I do swear it. I will do my best to fulfill this vow, before your 9 lives are up, my cat friend. I've had longer than 9 lives worth already, she snarked, but for what it's worth, I'm Trials the witch cat. I'd say it's a pleasure, if it was. Likewise, the vampire agreed. Then the two shook a hand and a paw, because they were a man shaking hands with an animal. This made a band of 4. Now, what of my 2 acquaintances? Go in the woods and find out, Drac. It was not long, however, 2 seconds, in fact, before the silhouettes of Robert and Adam burgeoned on the horizon. When they spotted Dracula, they began to run. When they were close enough to spot Trials at his feet, they seemed caught between joy and frustration. My fellows, this is Trials, said Dracula, a specialist of the spelling sort. Oh, they know, she said with a wink. Robert meant it when he said, you, really, here? That, wonderful. So too, though, did he mourn his aching calves as he realized that the chase through the forest had been for nothing. It was all the cat's own caprice, and less playing along was her own cat price. Adam kneeled to the cat's level and cautiously held out a fist for her to sniff. He said, half to himself, you wanted to show us humanity's wrath. To teach us, perhaps? To demonstrate why you fear even us, the monsters in human shape? Trials yawned and said, the whole rejecting non-werewolf animals thing was more of a welcome coincidence. You buffoons aren't scary. I cough up worse things than you. That is reassuring? Dracula, well satisfied by this reunion, clapped his hands to hurry them on. Now, then. Our time is only getting shorter. May I escort you all to the bat? Trials piped up, I don't know, may you? Aha. I do believe I am going to like this. Adam and Robert exchanged furtive eye rolls. From Egypt to England's temperate plain, and now to Africa's southernmost tip. The megabat Bistrid snagged his claws in dirt and ice as another vicious wind threatened to brush him away. Crystals and snow clods, like translucent jimmies, entrenched themselves in his fur. This was the dust of Old Man Winter's broom, gusty sweep, never does he stop his old man schedule. He does not even answer holophone calls. Snow smacked the castle's one window, whereat Dracula whirled the captain's wheel with a remarkably weary look. Dracula had steered Bistritz through Cape Agulhas for 3 hours, now so long, he feared that the bat might have perceived it as punishment. And he himself had been keyed up for more hours still, preparing meals and homestead for his guests, and every 15 minutes making a long and desperate call to his next location. If only his South African friend, that aging companion once so dear to him, would answer to give him a precise address. As his eyelids grew heavy for the somethingth time, there came the ring of an alarm he had set, an egg timer now buried under stacks of books, all shifting, suffocating the floor, as the bat teetered and struggled. Time to set out the supper. At least those within the castle Dracula remained as peaceful and snug as bugs and rugs. A similar egg timer rang in the drawing room, that being a fancy chamber meant to facilitate 19th century speed dating, but handy for all manner of chitter-chatter. Adam and Robert vacated, Trials was elsewhere, sniffing about. The dry man and the damp man found the dining room as full of delectables as before, heavy with halibut, pungent with pork, screaming with salads. Robert took his place with an admirational whistle. Not one but 3 distinct smorgasbords, lovingly cradled by trays of fine porcelain, were his, laden with meatballs, open-faced duck sandwiches, provolone sliders, and glittered slices of ham. He knew Dracula had come by the resonant slurp that ran through the wine glasses. In an instant there he was, the head vampire at the head of the table. Impressive, spread. Only, you, forget me, not, eat, meat. Dracula was close to nodding off. His reply was quiet, what? Said the fish-like man, rubbing his finish ear appendage. My, side, meat, but. Oh, bellowed Dracula, the shock of the moment awakened him. He leapt to his feet and began to speedwalk to Robert's side. Given the table's length, this would take a while. Apologies, dear Robert. What a grave mistake must not have been thinking, my mind was elsewhere. Robert laughed it off. No, trouble, really. You, go, relax. Adam was watching the scene from the far end. Though tired himself from another sleepless day/night/eventide, the quiet comfort of the Castlebat's depths had at least afforded some semblance of respite. The baptism of blood was not done changing him, his eyesight grew sharper by the moment so that, with his potent facial lenses, he now saw the whole table in a fair amount of detail. Standing and clearing his throat, he announced, kindly excuse me. No culinary error has been made, only Robert, you seem to be at the wrong seat. Reader, you already have an inkling of the layout of the table and the sitters thereat. While the vampires had stations at either end of the seriously long slab, Robert and Trials were to sit precisely in the middle, facing each other. So in the middle sat Robert, and in the same middle, Trials would join. Swapping seats was as easy as crawling underneath the table. Dracula, panting from sheer stress and worry, reached Robert's chair. He peered across and saw that Adam was right. Phew. Then I did not forget, though so much is on my mind. Please, take Trials' unclaimed seat. And so he did. Now Robert laid claim to a scenic vista of Tofurky double-deckers. So many of them, in fact, that he could not help but be disappointed in the display's lack of diversity. He did not wish to touch any nerves, not when they were so frayed. Yet, how could he bear to leave the subject be? How, when his new acquaintance Adam was noshing joyously on such daring meats? He chuckled warily. Vlad many, same, sandwich, here. Apologies. Dracula's cry stunned the scene. To his own surprise, his fists had clenched. He looked around, gulped a sad and disappointed gulp, and slinked back to his chair. He proceeded. I apologize for what you have just witnessed, and for the uninventive food as well. As both pilot and head chef, I could not make time to sift through my extensive cookbook library. Unhappily, I was forced to settle with the only Tofurky recipe I knew. Robert nodded, choosing not to point out Dracula's wrong-headed belief that he ate nothing but the tofu product. He said, to sympathize, good, you, sitting, down, now. With an elbow on the table and a hand against his chin, the pale fiend gave a heavy sigh. I do concede that it is time for me to take some of the RR. What about? He quirked an eyebrow. A story? Someone chirped, the president. It was the voice of Trials, the tiny cat that is, tiny in comparison to the smorgasbords that now surrounded her. Indeed, her head barely surpassed the table's edge. Don't you know the president? Talk about that. That, more, stressful, Robert grumbled, yet Dracula consented, and began. How do I know Igor? He repeated. Here is a better question, why will he not know me? Adam, who regretted sleeping through Dracula's first tale, listened keenly. He seconded the notion, indeed. I have tried to reconnect, believe me. Igor never takes my calls, nor does he maintain a publicly accessible interweb mailing box. It is as if he is determined to avoid confrontation of any kind. He was just on the debates, Trials butted in. He's a public figure. Why would he take calls from some old chestnut? Dracula roiled. We were the best of chestnut friends, he cried. Perhaps it was not his choice to be turned, to become a denizen of the night, but he followed me willfully for lifetimes. Did he have much of a choice? Asked Adam. Mayhap he pretended affection to stay in your castle, for the world does not take kindly to vampires. Dracula calmed himself. Listen. I knew Igor, and Igor knew me. He stayed for safety, yes, but for our friendship also. He is a kind soul, whose bleeding heart is drowning the galaxy, raising its blood werewolf content to an unconscionable high. The moment he left to pursue politics, I knew our bond would never be the same, for never again would we see eye to eye. However, it occurred to me 7 months and 7 days ago that the Igor I have always known is not stubborn to a fault, he is deeply forgiving. Had I wronged him all those centuries ago, surely he would let bygones be bygones. At the very least, he might wish to inform me of my error. And if someone had changed him, he shuddered, then a look in his eyes would have me know. Soon after my realization, on the stroke of midnight, Bistritz and the Castle Dracula descended on Washington, D.C. We found the brown house lawn pleasantly expansive, and utterly empty, it made a perfect landing pad. As Bistritz nibbled the grassy lawn which seemed to symbolize Igor's continuing goodwill, albeit shaved down by the lawn mower of political progress, I strolled to the brown house entrance and knocked. But the sound was quite hollow, and nobody answered. I came back the next night. And the next. Yes, for many midnights did I knock upon that door. Oh, no, said Robert. He had been hanging and shaking his head for nearly a minute now. That, lawn, not, parking, space. No wonder, you, public enemy, number 1. As you well know, all those who refuse to werewolfinize are regarded as traitors to the world government. Robert did well know, but he still yearned to say, didn't help, though. The yarn unspooled further. Eventually I said to myself, maybe Igor is not down there at the door, and maybe his doorman does not work after hours. It occurred to me that I had been quite silly. So Bistritz and I instead dropped in at the stroke of midday, myself wrapped in tight, wrappingish, mummy-like garb to block the sun. I knocked, and the door flew open, whereupon a tidal wave of guards lunged for me. Speedily I fled, dissolving into mist. Bistritz secured me in his mighty mouth and flew us into nighttime. I then said to myself, well, my face was hidden, after all. Maybe Igor's guards have been told to greet me if they recognize me. Aha, if I go straight to the president's office, then he will know I am here. So I determined to return and find his oval-shaped domain. Yes, I was to become an intruder in his own home, but for a noble cause, an undying ember of friendship. I commenced stealth tactics. 1 month and 1 day ago, Bistritz, remaining unseen above the clouds, passed above the brown house, allowing me to tuck, roll, skydive, activate my bat-themed parachute, and drift onto the lawn. Beforehand I had activated my werewolf blood, as well as applied sunscreen liberally. I successfully merged with a pack of tourists and thus gained access to the first floor. With that small success, my stealth game was over. I confided in a nearby Secret Service guard that I sought an audience with President Igor, my dear friend for many centuries. Where, pray tell, was the oblong office? Would he make time, I asked, for the one and only Count Dracula? That guard moved to apprehend me, but I struck her down with a maddening foamy mouth spell from the evil eye. With utmost haste and utmost fury, I rampaged through the Brown House halls, alarms blaring in my wake. When guards stood in my way, their colored lasers firing, I tossed my emergency sand and became a tornado top, reflecting their beams, dissolving every team. After enough stairways, I barreled through a door, running on and, not realizing where I was at first, I banged into Igor's desk and nearly fell backward. This was the very office, the very empty office. I roared with a wild pitch and volume not heard since my old impaling days. Surrounded by cases of moon rocks, craters of rage, I tore Igor's desk with my werewolf claws, bit into the center with my werewolf fangs. His paperweights and microchips went flying, breaking, crashing about. When my delirium settled, I surveyed the damage. Now came the regret. How could I be proud of this? One object laid intact on the ground, seeming not to want to break, a stack of papers, stapled. In my unreading, speeding, blurry-eyed state, I knew only that Igor must have treasured these papers, treasured them more, at any rate, than me. I clutched the papers tight. I decided that in my castle I would burn them. When the guards made their way in, I strong-armed my way through a massive window, where a trusty cloud of bats soon caught my shoulders and pulled me up toward the heavens. Not far in the distance, a rotorless helicopter, heavy with guns, took off and made for me, but my bats were too fast. Either Igor believes those papers to be destroyed, or he vastly underestimates me. That packet was the alien werewolfinization plan, which Robert and Adam have seen. Trials, you may read as well, if you wish. But she was no longer at the table. The intrigued Dracula had sensed in the curious beast's eyes, her wiggle-waggle tail, had not been her interest in the story, but her interest in a doodad under the table. In fact, his long windosity had so bored Trials that she had long since taken to swatting around that doodad. It was a hulking lump of dust. "All right, guys," she said whilst engaged in play. "I'm not complaining," she added immediately before complaining, "but, can we get a dead bird in this place?" Robert groaned. Dracula chuckled, if only to make up for said groanage. "I asked if you wished to read the werewolfinization document." "I'm out of practice," she mewed. "The last words I remember reading and comprehending are 'ye old cat food.'" "Very well," he acquiesced. And he looked up to see Robert bent and pensive in his seat, Trials suddenly absent, leaving the dust hunk in a troublingly visible spot and the majority of her smorgasbords untouched, and Adam sitting rigid, with an expression of startling seriosity. "Dracula," said the amalgam, "I am sorry from the lowest depths of my heart, smothered though they are in blood and sand. Who among us has not submitted to fury, wrong though we may be? You give every impression of a just parent unjustly abandoned. Indeed, it seems to me that it is no better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. You are too kind, dear Adam, and incidentally, I am surprised that during our whirlwind adventure you have found time to brush up on your Shakespeare." "Oh, no," said Adam, reception of flattery evident in his voice and face, "that is my personal permutation of a quote from one of the very few books I read during my first life, Paradise Lost. As I remember, the quote is, 'It is lost, lost paradise lost.'" The meal continued, but Dracula left early. With a flash of his cape and fair efforts at a laugh, he glided up the stairs, but that laugh was a banshee's, the cape's tail a phantom's black bedsheet. A bolt of lightning struck so near that the entire castle rattled, and Bistritz let out a piercing shriek. Had Dracula been able to see his fur, he would have seen it standing on end, the bat pricked all over by fright. "Soon, my friend," he called out, but the call was but a whimper, and he himself was not certain whom he was addressing, this brave bat, or the man of Cape Agulhas who yet ignored him. This snow, even through the night, glistened gently under vampire eyes and the mild light of the moon. Now Dracula turned his back to it. Reclining and resting his elbows on the wheel, he surveyed the captain's deck. He had taken a few things from his study and plopped them hastily in this room, so that they lay scattered and shifting like the sands of Giza, if sands were huge and mostly book-shaped. Here was a short shelf crammed with cookbooks, spilling at least one every hour, there an antique globe, hilariously outdated, whirling, and here, close to his foot, was a holophone, whose twisting shape was so gnarled and futuresque that I will not hazard to describe it to you. And there in the stairwell an Adam, his eyes oddly bright in the dimitude. "Are you well, Sir Count?" "Out with it." Adam flinched. He blinked, and now Dracula knew it was not his imagination, those were lights in his eyes, two honey-colored beams, faint. Adam drew a tad closer, mounting the last stair. "What do you mean?" "I merely offer my comfort, such as it is. I doubt you have slept even a piddle since Giza." "I mean," said Dracula, "that something weighs on your mind, and it has greater gravity than all my troubles." Adam flinched again, his sun eyes widening. "I can sense it and see it. I would tell you to look in a mirror, but you will just have to trust me. Or, perhaps, you might feel the spaces under your eyes. Those bags. Are they not heavier?" He lifted cautious hands to his face, conceding, "I have not slept either, for I have spent my nights deliberating." Dracula felt certain he was hiding something, would have slept if his body would allow it. Sad, he thought, that Adam wished so dearly not to trouble him. He remembered sleepless nights, however, as part of his own baptism of blood, they would not assail the new vampire for long. "I have been pondering werewolfism," said Adam, and as he revealed a full truth, his speech grew more comfortable. He entered the mode of an inquirer, a scholar. "You are both werewolf and vampire, correct? Do the two states confound each other?" "What do you mean?" "Well, it seems it is not that you avoid Earth, but that you have no choice, for most werewolves do not sip blood, and can survive with ease in the day." Dracula smiled. "Very observant. A true vampire, one who knows his stuff, has ways around this. He becomes the knight, remember, he uses stealth to plunder. He cloaks his inability to walk in daylight behind excuses, a fancy castle packed with servants, for example." With a hushed gasp, Adam said, "or a house-like dome, covered in furs." "You've got it." Dracula snapped his fingers. "Igor has mastered the masquerade. Very few know of his vampirism, very few now living. I do not know how many servants provide for his vampiric needs in that house of his. I do theorize, as I am a man of science, that the First Lady may be offering her help or her neck. Through televised interwebs, I have seen him navigate the public space. When attending conferences, for instance, he strides straight from vehicle to building, making sure to walk under trees and awnings." "Then there are ways?" Dracula did not plumb the full depths of this final line. He did not realize how cryptic it was, for he had no time to. For Bistritz let out a remarkable cry, a different cry, louder than any he had heard all night. A happy cry. A nostalgic cry, for even to Bistritz this home and its man were familiar. In moments, the foursome, snowcoat-clad, stood in a storm so thick with gales and icy clods that to mortals and vampires alike the sky was scarcely perceptible, the cape's boulders mere specters. They had walked not 10 footsteps from the castle Dracula's front gates when, disturbingly close by, lightning struck. They dove into snow mounds in hopes of avoiding soaring debris, which included a puffin, launched head over heels like a scorched and mist-thrown football. "Egad," pipped Adam. When he raised his head and wiped the snow crusts from his eyes, however, he changed his tune, for before them was their destination. "Oh, I mean, I am glad." There it was, a grand and lonesome estate, which not only towered above, but spread its girth wide. How Dracula could have missed such a monumental thing, could have led Bistritz astray for hours, is explained by the confounding nature of Cape Agulhas weather and terrain. Landmarks blend together, radar signals bounce. In front on their right was a mansion, an egregiously oversized mansion. Its walls struggled to maintain snow white, but the color was washing out, beaten by decades of snow and earthy dirts. To the left of the mansion stood its means of self-sustainment, a barnhouse and silo worthy of old MacDonald, sitting atop grass, the cherry red and emerald green of them visible through a translucent dome. There must have been half an acre in there. It teemed with thick grasses which waved gingerly despite the tundric craze outside. It fostered animals of the domestic sort, and the party, moving closer, could actually see pink pigs as specks roaming the inner expanse. Owner must be rich, Robert hazarded, raising his voice in the blasted snow. You may actually be the one to recognize him. Come, urged the Count, we cannot keep our final teammate waiting. Yeah, let's hurry this up, remarked Trials. I don't want to end up as someone's catsicle, if you catch my snowdrift. She had removed her cat coat many steps ago, citing it as too itchy. Robert ached to call her out on this hypocrisy, but restrained himself. Dracula banged the doorknocker. It was shaped like a tennis shoe filled with a foot, all molded so perfectly that it seemed liable to take off sprinting right then and there. Who could this new enigmatic figure be? A descendant of the remarkable Jekyll or Hyde? Jack the Ripper's grandson 20 times removed, Mac the Dipper? George Washington's ghost? The possibilities were restricted only by the imagination. Maybe a troll, I don't know. That's a kind of monster, I think. What are you sellin'? Grunted an angry eye behind the cracked door. Dracula stated, freedom. 8 locks were heard twisting loose and falling away. The door was opened by the mansion's sole occupant, nothing but a frumpy man. His brown hair was frosting gray, which, in concert with fat and wrinkles, betrayed lost youth and fortitude. Yet his eyes retained a spark and transmuted that spark into an unnerving, even depressing, look. Clearly, though he was no vampire, he had his own power to hypnotize. Drax back, he muttered derisively. And I see you brought the whole monster squad with ya. The Count persisted. May we please come in? It is dreadfully cold out. Do whatever. But I know what you're gonna ask, and I ain't interested, mate. He opened the door with a careless swing and said, here, walk this way. Then he shuffled inside on fluffed slippers, moving mechanically, straight ahead. The 4 followed suit, shuffling inside on fluffed slippers, for there were many pairs beside the door. They searched for a coat rack, but there was none. The mansion owner gestured weakly to the floor, where a parka of his own had been flung. The foursome shrugged amongst themselves and did the same. Already this place, and his glare, infected them. On their way to the lounge, they passed the open doors of a closet and a kitchen. The proportions of the 2-story fridge, the basin sink, the closet bar devoid of hangers that stretched as long as a firehouse pole is tall, were outrageous, worthy of kings large kings. They entered a lounge so grand that the doorways studding its walls were like holes on a thimble, negligibly small. Against the vaulted glass ceiling, which shined and slanted like a diamond, the battering snow was a mere drizzle. Ancient English tapestries, original paintings framed in gold, and countless amphorae lined the walls, their glister hinting coyly at secrets none alive could ever know. Yet with all their splendor, there remained one fact no opus in an 80-square-foot guest room could hide: the man was sad. The furnishments told that story. There in the very, very center of the room, upon a sumptuous recreation of the 5th scene on the Bayeux's tapestry, sat a single lamp and 2 folding chairs. The lamp was off and the chairs remained folded. The mansion's master made the long shuffle in, the visitors close behind, all in a line, unbreaking, unturning. He picked up the first chair. It collapsed into parts, destroying itself in his very grasp. He picked up the second chair. It disintegrated, atomically blowing away in the sudden chill that wandered through this warehouse-sized guest room. The man stared at his empty hands. Then, without a word, they all sat crisscross on the tapestry, except Trials' reader, don't be a smart apple. They used the ceiling's snow and moonlight to illumine their conversation, since their host did not bother to turn on the light. Robert pieced together all the facts, the exorbitance, the physical features, the neck-bound gold medal, dented, which he used to open soda cans. Such money, that face, he said. You must be Walter, Whipple Olympic, sprinter, from, back, in, day. Yeah, and what of it? Walter growled. Want an autograph or something? He spat. His spit landed 70 feet away in an antique spittoon originally awarded to the winner of the 478 BCE Panathenaic Games. Wow. What a dump, snarked Trials, and I'm not talking about the house. I heard that, the Whipple snapped. Look, you can warm up, state your business, and then I want your butts outta here. I'm thirsty, so I'm getting me a drink. Everyone watched as Walter Whipple shuffled across the floor and made a straight line from the seating area to the humongo kitchen. No longer was he king of the sprint. One would not even think him king of the bocce ball. Walter Whipple returned with a single enormous drink in a wide-brimmed goblet. He sat. He lifted sapphire to lip and drank deep of this life. Did his cup runneth over? No, for he no longer ranneth. He set it down. What are you looking at? Spill those beans, Drac. Dracula gulped, drinking deep of sadness and a bygone friendship. I was only, waiting on you, dear Walter. Well, don't. I got errands. I just got done night feeding the horses, and soon I'll have to night feed the chickens. An exiled life of animal husbandry does not suit you. Dracula bellowed with his arms thrown wide. I come to you with my ragtag band of monsters and misfits to invite you back into society. If my plot is successful and my heart can reach Igor's, I assure you I can grant you amnesty and mainstream acceptance the likes of which you have never experienced. Walter gruffed, without humor, you're pulling my leg. And nobody pulls these hamstrings but me. You think I'm not happy where I am? It was my choice to come out here, as far away from werewolves as I could, and live my own way. You're not putting me on your terms. Not me, of all people. Pardon my ignorance, said Adam with his hand raised skull-kiddishly, however, I have slumbered for a millennium, and have no knowledge of this angry old man I see before us. Why, in truth, must we scrape to incorporate a normal human in our ranks? If this be the goal, why do we not merely reach into any city in the world and pluck an ordinary Joseph from the street? I'm with Rags, said Trials uncomplimentarily. We've got enough fogies. This guy is so fat and old, the only thing he could outrun is a BLT. Robert heaved, Trials, you, centuries, old. Then, turning to Adam, he said, this, man, incredibly, special. Back, in, day. Yes. Dracula co-opted, pointing with an eager finger. Back in the day. Save your breath, guys, I can give my own backstory, said Walter. You seen any other humans in your travels so far? Must not be gone into any o' those miracle cities you just made up. Ever since the world government made humanity a crime, I've been refusing the werewolf surgery. I'm the only man who didn't want it. I live human and I'll die human. To the rest of society, this makes me a monster. A fleshy freak of nature. Like how you're a freak of nature, Hatshepsutine. Monsieur, call me not monster. I am Adam. Heck. They used to call me the Olympic champion sprinter. He slapped his hands upon the knees and hamstrings that withered even as they spoke. Nobody gave me respect then, either. And I was happy livin' that way. But would it be no lie, Dracula proposed, to say you wish to experience something from bygone days? Like, say, the moon, or the house of your childhood, He snapped his fingers. Deep down you may still crave a sense of community that you received in that greatest of Olympic sprints. Walter shook his head. My life ain't a bargain and chip, Drac. Besides, any chance I have to distance myself from war humanity and laugh, I'll take. You laugh? Said Trials. In this freezer? What's that gonna do? Those people don't care. Games aren't worth anything if you're like 50 million miles from whoever you're toying with. Unless you've got a megaphone. To the circle's surprise, this got Walter to Hayek. Exhausted though that laugh may have been, it tempered his character ever so slightly. The unnerve streaming from his eyes changed, as if the mind within, a vessel of long expired and curdling milk, had been left outside for 35 years but just took a step back in time one day back. This gave Dracula hope, for Rome was not pasteurized in a day. Then issued forth a wistful sigh. Yeah, I miss the days when I used to whip my legs in front o' the world. But I'd rather keep him cooped up in the southernmost tip of the continent than live among those werjerks. No thanks. Dracula raced to say, but have you considered? But Walter Whipple leaped from his crisscrossed position, a feat which none others on earth could manage, not the acrobat vampires, not reanimate dead, no hyphenated men, nor even the flexi felidae. He flipped 3 times in the air and landed on his slippered toe tips with such ease that to him, the magnitude of his accomplishment did not even register. Now, Drac, he said, I respect ya as a fellow outsider, but you can go play your games with someone a little less tired of this crap. Take your leave when you're set, anyhow. He shuffled away, as slow as a stalactite's melt, in a perfectly straight line. Dracula could hardly suppress his excitement. He was shaking and grinning like a child circus-bound. When the man was distant enough, Trial said, Who needs him? In his exuberance, Dracula exploded. You just witnessed his acrobatic capability. He shuffles now, but were those slippers off, he would move as if weightless. His athletic ability far surpasses any wolfman's. Being a werewolf does enhance the muscles and reflexes of normal humans, as well as of many monster types, yours truly included, but when he flapped those feet in those 2,987 Olympic Games, the spectators swore up and down that his human shape gave him an unfair advantage. Walter Whipple is a natural-born running monster. Walter, with a third of the room to go, froze. He was squinting at its exit. What is wrong, my fast friend? Have my paltry compliments thawed your icy heart? No, just hush up a second. He squinted harder. What was wrong with his hallway? The lighting was off, but why? Seconds ticked by until the reason came to light. The reason was light on a bomb's fuse. Walter retreated, doing a hustle shuffle, back, toward the guest room. Everybody in the kitchen. The guests looked about for a moment more. Only when Dracula dashed to that kitchen waving the rest on did they follow suit. It's a bomb, shouted Walter, sweat flying. Get in the sink. The squad jumped and rolled in, their slippers flying. Lucky for them, the sink, as big and platinum as money could buy, was as roomy as a triple-sized tub. Walter, seeing that no room remained, spun ballerina-like into the fridge. Seconds later, a fireball blast detonated in the living room, and its infernal remnants came their way, blazing through cabinetry and chip bags, $50 each. It only charred the backs of those in the sink. The aforementioned 4 rose bewildered. There was a newly wrought fire crackling in the center of the guest room, and though it was not nearly big enough to cover 80 feet, it was devouring the center, chewing through the tapestry fragment they had sat on a mere moment ago. Walter emerged from his fridge unharmed. Fear not for his exposure to cold, he was quite familiar with it. Tarnation, said Adam. Good gracious, said Dracula. Good thing I have such a big house, said Walter. Have I truly brought danger into the home of my friend? Dracula went on to gulp. Dear sweet Walter. Please make haste. Get to safety as we deal with whatever visitors we seem to have brought. Aloe dash. 2 garlic canisters rolled in through the doorway. In a mere sliver of a mere second, Walter kicked off one slipper and it hit the first canister, and he kicked off the second slipper and it hit the second canister, and readers should imagine this happening in slow motion, and all 4 things, the kicked things and the hit things, flew out, and they landed in the bonfire as ash. Walter chuckled. Police, mate. This is my house, and you're my guests. And no wolves are gonna throw a party on my property uninvited. Dracula looked to Walter's feet and was filled with gladness, for he was wearing familiar toe socks. The Sprint Maven's spirit had grown rougher over the years, but it surely had not dulled. Military-grade boots kicked through the glass ceiling, sending shards flying across the concrete and twinkling into the central flame below. 3 werewolves descending via ropes, in berets and white-mottled army fatigues, with green camo moons, made their ghastly entrance. Dracula readied his fangs, Adam rubbed his hands, the whole of them tensed, but the rope stopped a quarter of the way. Greyport, yarped one commando into a wrist communicator. Rope's too short. Requesting additional rope to tie to the ends. But an Antarctic chill swept across the roof and had its way with the dangling wolves, rustling them like wind chimes. The three became tangled, conking into each other with heads, backs, and moons. Weather conditions too hazardous for additional rope operation, an ally responded. Initiating doggy recall. In a quite sluggish and embarrassing display, the three Worsstooges were reeled back into the helicopter whence they'd lunged. I figured this'd happen someday, said Walter. Had this house set up with several anti-siege measures. Thanks to my Olympics money, I've got more tricks than a werewolf at a werewolf show. Their next foes emerged from holes, dozens of hand drills came cracking through the floor before their kitchen. Wolves poked their heads out, looked around, and spotted our favorite ghouls. Enemy sighted. Commencing disengagement from 2 Ruro. The diggers ducked just in time as the fridge, like a hammer, smashed onto their hulls. Robert, triumphant, pumped his appliance-throwing arms and squealed like a hog. Walter, with a wonderful singing laugh, rang a tiny glass bell. I don't know why. The guest room's open ceiling let cold and snow stream in, meaning the bonfire was shrinking by the second and the militias storm the guest room concept was beginning to look pathetic, that is, until its commander made her presence known. Enough games, she shouted, from a hole just before the pyre stepped another wolf with a bad attitude. Alice Liddell, the head of defense, climbed out in fatigues and aviator shades, framed by the last glint of a dying fire, capping her sentence with the pop of a dying gum bubble. If her authoritative tone had not made her position clear enough, her mini-moon did, haloing gold. They know we're here. Let's say our greetings all at the same time. All hands fire. The gang had no time to think, hardly time to clear out, and Walter was still ringing his bell, though with a grim face now. Come on, babies, he muttered moments before the entire kitchen-facing wall of the guest room was decimated. Barreling in like a steamroller, came a whole wall's worth of laser-packed light, flying at the speed of itself. In a blazing flash, all that Dracula's people had seen of Walter's house was razed. The kitchen, gone. The amphory, obliterated. The ceiling 80 feet above, now nothing. The guest room, non-existent, save for 2 charred walls. The piles of parkas and slippers by his door, destroy well, actually, the entrance remained blissfully intact. When the pink flash left, there followed wispy smoke and vapor, then a cheer and high-five from the firing squad behind them. Alice clambered back out of her hole, onto the concrete floor where snow was beginning to heap. Raising her sunglasses, she watched, keeping her eyes on the space where her enemies once stood. Perhaps she and her firing squad had given not only greetings, but partings. Or not, for in that spot, in place of Dracula et al., there now stood 2 giant mechanical shoes sneaker-shaped bumper cars. From the hole of one, Robert and Trials poked out tentatively. From the other came Walter Whipple and the 2 delightful hogs who, in answer to the bell, had skillfully driven the emergency bumper cars into position. And in front of them, saviors, by their twin tango of kicked-up diamond dust, were Dracula, in wolf form, and Adam. What coordination, remarked Dracula. You make a fine vampire. I surprise myself, said Adam with a bow. Hey, dog bones, cried Trials from Robert's lap. How's it feel knowing you fired everywhere and still missed? Then, shortly after giving Robert the stink eye, she climbed onto his face and head with mercifully non-extended claws. Try again, aim here. As she cackled, Robert, rocking and groaning, lurched into a special technique, the get off my lawn fist shake. Commander Alice raised one arm saying, how impudent. Well, if at first you don't succeed. A posse of soldiers re-aimed and re-fired at the cat and her fish, but the shots all bounced away, cast aside by a sneaker launched from the sneaker gun on the giant sneaker housing Walter and his 2 cozy pigs. Shoot cars, Walter said coolly. Don't leave home without 'em. Or, rather, don't be home without 'em. How stupid, Alice maligned. Almost dismissively she ordered, "Charge. Apprehend them, hand to hand." And the whole centurion of wolf folk reholstered their guns before stamping forth. The undaunted Adam rallied Dracula's troops, leading with a smile, his left fist raised. Though they were all suffused with blizzard snows, without coats nor ceiling to guard them, the fighting spirit warmed them. Tally-ho! Let us loose us monsters of war. The werewolves were closing the gap with wicked speed, mere meters away now, and Walter's pig friends snorted with fright, but Walter stared them down, and aimed his shoe rifles. Robert again insisted that Trials get off his green, lawn-like face, and she did, bounding onto the concrete. Dracula rolled up his sleeves, for the werewolf blood raced positively hot within him. And Adam's bandages glowed with arcane slavonograms and began sliding along his body, just as they had when he powered up in Giza. And then the mummy said it, "With my left hand, I invoke the name Ram-Giug." A werewolf clotheslined him, knocking Adam off his feet and nearly casting his pharaotic headdress from his skull. He rose on his left palm, raised the right, and hollered, "With my right hand I douh." 5 werewolves ran simultaneously across his chest. It was no use, the wolf army was here, the forces had already converged. Luckily, his friends were kicking butt in the snowstorm. Dracula was flitting back and forth between mist and corporeality, darting through the crowd and picking off wolves like a fish pursuing nutritional flakes. One nip at an unsuspecting neck and they collapsed, knocked out for another 5, maybe 6 hours. This time, Trials needed no illusions to evade capture. Nimble and lithe, she ran between shins like a soccer ball gone haywire. Everywhere she went, a werewolf barked and fell in a simmering blaze, for she chanted, "Fire pyre multiplier. Fire pyre multiplier." Adam was not to be outdone. "I needs must simplify my tactics," he concluded, briefly suffering a knee to the face. Glowing red wrappings congregated around his arms, and the scars they exposed hummed faintly gold, and he became a beacon in the storm. He rose, and, with hands in karate-chopping shape and form, began whapping and smacking wolves from his path. He was relying on strength alone, but it was strength enhanced, equivalent to that of, if I had to guess, 22 humans. Meanwhile, in their own theater of this battle, Walter Whipple and Robert Fishman were firing sneakers left and right. The bottom of their bowling shoe cars produced little warm jets of air, melting the earthbound snow. This allowed them to drift slowly about the concrete floor, as if each were a puck on an air hockey rink. Lucky shoe shots hit wolves in the gut, making them to buckle, but the wolves were getting wise to this and starting to slap shoes away. As they encroached, the spat travelers broke into ice-cold sweats, and not because of the bitter snow. "Guys," Walter moaned, the terrified pigs at either side hugging him, "I'm starting to think that shoes might not be strong enough." Axe wax gax, magicked a saint nearby. Then she did it again. 2 Viking battle axes poofed into existence and fluttered into their hands. Then she did it 2 more times. Walter's pigs got axes too. 1 moment ago, that werewolf right in front of Robert had looked devious, bloodthirsty, but the glint of the axe wiped the smirk from his gullet. Now Robert stood in his seat and, with his axe raised like a golf club, said, "Time for reversal, to end all reversals." But then Alice halted the action with a shout, "Make way." It was impressive how quickly the werewolves scattered. They ran yipping and tripping into the foggy veil of snow, many fighting to push past others, to escape most quickly. Those who had been pushed to the ground, who ended up nearby when Alice approached, broke out in whimpers and involuntary twitching fits. Observers could safely conclude that Alice was a strong and excellent commander. Daringly, she marched into Robert's path in the middle of a heavy axe swing. She had considered reaching for a pistol, but she thought better of that. Instead, she thrust forth a lighter. She clicked the fire to life and waved it in his face, and Robert shook so terrifically that he dropped his axe, which shattered on the floor. Memories of accidentally dousing himself in gasoline and bumping into a gas lantern came screaming back. "Aya! Fire! Fire! You'll burn my gills," he shrieked. He promptly lost control of the bumper car. It drifted quite slowly into Alice's kneecaps, bumping against them. Alice flicked shut the lighter. With ease and her foot, she shoved the car away. Robert spiraled helplessly into the snowdrift, toward some hungry pack of soldiers, any one of whom could easily have made his match in combat. Walter came in gun blazing, hitting Alice's shins with a torrent of turret-fired size 7s. Actually, he had been doing this from a little distance for the past 30 seconds, only now did Alice devote any attention to him. With his free hand did he also raise his battle-axe very threatsomely. His haunting eyes said, "I may be too far away to axe you now, mate, but in a minute? 2 minutes? Then you'll be sorry." The pigs, being pigs, had eaten their axes long ago and sat contentedly at his flanks. To make sure that every monster around could hear the message to follow, Alice tapped her Moderno Future accessorial wrist communications hyperwatch, causing a megaphone to spring forth. "Now, Mr. Whipple," she all but hollered into his face, "I come as a representative of the world government to commandeer ownership of your house. All of your land is now under jurisdiction of myself, Alice Liddell." And just to prove her point, she briefly produced a legal document that read "Deed this house," with a gold ribbon attached at the bottom. Walter gasped, "But that's not real." "Correct," she blared as he sluggishly, sweatily approached, "but in world government courts, world government-produced forgeries are the highest form of evidence." Walter, stunned, could only breathe. Dracula revisibilified behind Alice and wrangled her in a chokehold. Alice, however, utilizing judo moves, bent forward at incredible speed, flinging Dracula clear off and out of bounds. He was launched into the entry hall, still standing, onto the front door, now collapsed under Dracula's weight, and straight into a massive pile of snow. He flung a flurry's worth away and scrabbled upright, dumbstruck, staring through the doorway. He remained nearly unharmed, and yet he puffed as thought the wind were knocked out of him. Slowly he brought his hand toward the doorway but not through it, as he was barred from doing so by a repulsive force. "Oh no," he whispered. Then with infernal fury he pounded the field-like force and roared, "How dare you, Alice? Invite me in right now." "These ridiculous weaknesses grow curiouser and curiouser," she replied. "Sorry, I meant more stupid and then again even more stupid." From tens of meters away, Dracula could see, as through a tumultuous haily veil, specks and masses of camel-clad werewolves. Then he saw a bolt of unmistakable red, one of Adam's papyrus wrappings stretching so far through the crowds that it cut clear across Dracula's field of vision. Were he closer, he would have seen it zip past soldiers' heads and moons to coil around Alice's head. "Now that's some aim and hand-eye coordination," Adam cried. "There is nothing more stupid than guile and evil." Walter cried, "Frankie, no." Alice enacted the same judo flip. Adam, gone airborne with his bungee cord paper, slingshot through the very same entryway and the very same formerly standing door. He slammed into Dracula with an oof. "Of course I will not invite you or your protege back inside. I'll get to you once the weaker set is dealt with. Officer Bones, get the cross." A peon, muttering "Gotcha, Boss Gruff," darted briefly past the entrance for to toss a tiny rosary at them. "You," said Dracula as it landed in his hands. He bounced it around like it was an incredibly warm potato, then hurled it away blindly. It cracked Adam in the shin and it really smarted. "Yoch," he said, proving the point above. Not so far away, Trials had just finished deceiving a couple of werewolves. One was running right to catch her, the other running left, and just when she had seemed within each one's grasp, she had hopped away, causing them to buffonically crash into each other. Now she approached Alice rather casually. "Injustice from the government? That joke's even older than the one about airline food." "A little late, aren't you?" said Alice. She just happened to have a bag of salted peanuts in her pocket. These she opened and strewed about Trials. But the cat, instead of capering about them as Alice had hoped, sat there unimpressed. "You expect me to play with these miniature trashes? You're kidding me. This is literally airline food." "Think of it this way," Alice rationalized. "This is a show, and that's your movie food. Yeah, a movie about watching you beat up old dudes. Sure, but look at that, said Alice with a gesture toward Walter. His shoe was still hurtling in like a comet. His arms were still raised, only now they were empty, and quivering with panic. He said, "Oh no. The pigs, they've eaten my axe." Indeed, the pigs were gnawing happily. Say the axe spell, cat, the axe spell. Trials clicked her tongue. Kinda mean, innit? That's kind of the point. Trials looked down to the peanuts, then back to Alice. Then her gaze fell to Alice's ankle, which idled conveniently close to her fangs. A hail of lasers from Alice's core peppered Trials. I mean few. They merely peppered the air and ground which she had so recently occupied. She ran yowling, skittering as if on hot tin, and scrambled for cover as the lasers followed. Alice smirked. She raised her megaphone anew and said, "Thanks, soldiers." From far away, through a dense curtain of snow, the nearest officer screeched, "You're welcome, Commander. You all can come a bit closer, you know." The soldiers didn't respond. "Well, Walter Whipple," she said to the man who was still a good 3 feet and 2 minutes away, "you have just aided the world's most wanted criminal, Count Vlad Dracula." She revealed her pistol. "For this crime, you've been sentenced to death. Any last words?" Being in a giant shoe undeniably had its advantages, but Walter Whipple knew it was time to hop out and stretch his quads. So he stepped onto snow, and when he stooped, it was to conquer. "Yeah, ya slow wolf," he roasted, readying haunches. "You'll have to catch me first." In the distance, Dracula's fists pounded against the house force, fencing the vampires out, while Adam's red arms punched and chopped. They were barely able to hear Walter's side of this talk. They almost did not need to. "No, you cannot do this," shrieked Dracula. "Alice! How cruel is this fate," blubbered Adam. Each moment he came closer to tears, was filled more completely with pathos. "Beg for clemency, and free yourself of senseless destruction, Walter. Why don't you hit me with your best shot?" Walter challenged. "I can outrun anything you dish out at me." He wobbled a leg in boast. "Just watch me whip 'em." "Nay, Whipple, nay," wailed the 2 vampires. But Walter was insensible to reason. He turned his back to Alice with a laugh, and Alice thumped the light gun against the back of his head. The trigger clicked and a single line, charged with ultraviolet powers, shot from the bulb. So Walter whipped his legs back and forth. 50 years ago, there were not so many werewolves around. Maybe just 3 billion in all. Back in those days, a cute young boy would play with his father in the English Highlands just behind their home, trotting up and down the hills under the hot spring sun. And this boy, one day, asked his dear father, in an accent which, as I only realized in hindsight when I edited this piece, must reflect my unfamiliarity with Britain, but which I find, ultimately, so vital to this work that it cannot be threatened without sullying the good name and integrity of Invisible Werewolf Dracula meets Vampire Mummy Frankenstein. Dottie, hoi doi yo roin so foist? Can yo toich moi hoi toi roin? "Yes, my son," said his father. "I will teach you how to run." He bent before his child and pointed to his little legs. "First you're going to put out your left foot." And so he did. "And next, you're going to put out your right foot." And so he did. "Now you've got it. All you've got to do now is whip them legs real fast back and forth." "Woy," gasped young Walter Whipple. "Thanks, Dottie. Oi am going to boy the foistest roiner oiver." Yes, indeed, you can. Maybe the fastest ever born on the earth." Beaming with pride as that father was, he still could not staunch the hot tears from running down his face and onto his boy's shoulders. It was time to have him face the truth. I've talked it over with your mother, Walter. It's time that we all 3 go and get the werewolfinization surgery done." He breathed a deep sigh. "Everyone else in the community has, and we don't want you to be bullied by the others for not fitting in." He sniffled and wiped his face. "It'll be fun, the government has even offered free mini-moons." "Werewolves," shrieked Walter. "Joiminy crickets. In his shock, he whipped those legs of his so fast that he cleared 3 foothills and disappeared into the distance in a matter of seconds. All that was left of him was a long cloud of dust trailing after him. He ran fast. He ran long. He ran as far as he possibly could that day, because if he could run quick enough he could get away from anything. He'd run away from becoming anything he didn't want to be. He didn't want to be a wolfman. He just wanted to be a runner. Now in his ragged mansion, Walter, just as he had long ago, whipped them aged legs. His Olympic stands were Dracula and Adam, the former gripping firmly the latter's shoulder, as if he would never let go again. He willed the only thing he could will, that his once dead friend would pay strict attention, for this may well have been the final time the world's fastest man took a run. The pharaonic Frankenstein watched, he did, but he also prayed deep in his heart. To which god, possibly Ra or Osiris, no one knew, not even himself. Who but a god could reach Walter now? The laser flew at the speed of light, but Walter, with speed beyond compare, disappeared. The sprinter flew through the epic remains as if he were weightless. The world became a dark blur around him, forcing him to cup his hands around his eyes to see through rushing winds and hammerforce snow. He glanced over his shoulder. The laser bullet was gaining on him. "Oh, you think you're so hot, huh?" he shouted, in a taunt that nobody could hear. He had broken a barrier, entered a Mach speed that no one had even invented a name for. "Well, in that case, why don't I learn ya a little? This old man's got something left in the tank." He pushed his legs harder, whipped them still faster. Another speed barrier shattered around him with a deafening crash. He'd entered the paradise of velocity. His cells pulled strength from a primordial energy left by his forefathers, his stomach became full, his body was cleansed of dead skin and oil, his heart forgot all his traumas and heartbreaks. His physical form shrank back to his prime, his 23rd year, the year he won the Olympic Games. No. Even younger than that, he was back in the race. The South African chill became the sun warmth underneath that open dome sky. Here was the arena, packed to the brim with the shouts, cheers, and jeers of more people than he would ever see again in his life. Far too many of them carried signs that barked "No more humans, werewolves are better" in every language known to man, and some known only to the future. Just for today, though, they did not matter. None of the controversy mattered. Walter was so far ahead of the other runners that he won it all before the rest had even come halfway. He raised his arms in the air. He, simultaneous breaker of worldly bounds and bester of Alice's bullet. The blade of light was shrinking behind him, he was getting even faster. The victory tape at the end of the track was unfurled hastily to meet a man it had sorely underestimated. Champion Walter braced for the impact of ribbon hugging him for a split of a second to welcome him, to signal the rise and rebirth of a new gold medalist, in front of the entire world right before he heard Adam's words. "You shall crash into the wall at the other end of your guest room, Mr. Whipple. You must veer right or you must veer left to avoid that laser bullet." "BB, but I can only run forwards," said Walter. "I can't get out of the way." He hit no finish line tape, only the solid and unbroken wall. His fantasy shattered with his body. Then the bullet caught up and finished the job, flooding him with thousands of fuchsia volts. He collapsed onto his side, and smoke poured from his mouth, nose, and ears. His body had not changed after all, and he reflected bitterly that he must even have retained the depressing glint in his eye which time had bestowed in lieu of cataracts. I thought that I could whip up them legs and run from everything in my life. Even discrimination," he said in as shallow a voice as can be imagined. "But I was wrong. It was just too fast for me. How could just losing a race make me feel so bitter?" The sensitive vampire ears, strained to their limit, picked up every word. "Mr. Whipple." "No." Adam bellowed. Dracula fell to his knees with his forehead pressed to the invisible barrier. Alice spun her pistol, blew off the smoke, and pocketed it. Meters off, Robert lay unconscious and battered in the snow. Mercifully, he had not witnessed this death. Trials emerged from the basin sink, stunned by the explosion she'd heard, blinking through crystal snow. The remaining werewolf troops, around 50, amassed their numbers and tramped into the little entryway, raising their fists and guns against the vampire duo. Even if the Piras retained their physical strength, their wilted hearts left them momentarily weak. Adam stared away from his foes, into the permanently frosted earth. "This cannot be the end," he moaned. "Have we all failed? Shall our goal go unsatisfied, honestly and truly? Was this the fate I was reborn so near ago to fulfill? A life of frustration, rotting forevermore?" There was a pregnant pause. Alice said through a megaphone, "Yes. Full speed ahea." Trials took a 5-foot leap and knocked Alice in the face with the brunt of her whole body. Alice steadied herself, grabbed the cat, and instinctively enacted her judo flip, but this only threw Trials toward the crowd of every single remaining conscious soldier. One of them turned, saying, "What the bark?" "Rocks crocs talks," she meowed, and a storm of pebbles materialized around her, orbiting almost like her very own mini-moons. She whizzed into the crowd, which, knocked in heads and faces by the flying rocks, was forcibly cleared for her. Thus she entered with as much ease as a video game spaceship with a revolving shield around it. As Trials left the last of the wolves and her forehead-nailing rocks behind, soaring nearer to Dracula and Adam, it seemed as if surely she would plop upon her side and skid. With a magical moment's twist, however, she was on her soft feet, in plush snow, standing comfortably between them. This, at least, was a relief. "Enough balderdash," Alice cried. "At least we'll kill the cat." "Fire." Nothing happened. "Oh," she said, "they're all knocked out." The megaphone retracted. She hesitated, turning away to collect herself. She created and destroyed a gum bubble. "Wait a second," she exclaimed. "Of course. That's it. If you can't kill them, arrest them." "Arrest him, you mean," Dracula boldly declared, his voice echoing in the guest room's ruins. He was standing at the mansion doorway, bold as a shadow, totally alone, with no allies behind him. "We all know that your feud lies squarely with myself. With my help and powers beyond your comprehension, 2 of my allies have made it to safe quarters." The abilities in question, nothing but Adam's papyrus, his tentacles and slithericles repurposed into legs for a quick, jogging getaway. Dracula paused, however, catching a whiff of horror. "But as for Robert..." "Me, all right," wailed the man like fish. He was never unconscious after all, he had played dead. With his remaining power, he, battle-scarred, had pulled himself across the snow and, like a scaly rug, snuck up most covertly behind Alice. "Didn't want, say, anything. Wanted, surprise, attack, but that, okay." Your safety. Dracula's melancholy cast, impossibly, grew a shade darker. "Your safety is more important, Robert." Robert's eyes shimmered. "Not to me," Alice butted in. "Well, I must say, I don't care for you alive or dead, Fishman. You're too weak for your life to be any matter to me. You may think you have gumption, but 2 weeks in the DC prison would soften you." Robert struggled close enough to grab her, but at that point Alice merely abandoned him, marching up to the doorway. She positioned herself inches from Dracula's nose. Her golden mini-moon all but scraped his forehead on its circuit. "Rather bold," said Dracula quietly. "Rather impudent. You don't run the world." He raised his cape, and thence came to life a flurry of bats that took wing with flutters and blood-curdling squeals. They flew into the snowy sky like petals of Dracula's ever-flowering night. "Perhaps I do," he said. "What say we put this to rest here and now, and end this blood-tinged battle?" It was on Alice to make the first move, to either invite Dracula in or herself cross the force field boundary. Instead, she appeared to stall. From a back pocket she outdrew a short list, an official one from Finterpol. The F stood for future. Count Dracula, hundreds of years of stealing the blood of others, and first-degree murder. Robert Fishman, murder and assault. Those were in self-defense, growled Dracula. Trials, 16th century witchcraft and wizardry. That was only illegal within the 16th century. Frankenstein, the murders of 5 people. His name is Adam. Walter Whipple, repeatedly refusing government mandates, and tax evasion. Dracula's eyes turned the color of the blood moon. He thundered, I did not know he did not pay his taxes. To the public eye, you are monsters. Rightly so, you terrify us because you refuse to follow the societal norms that keep us moving forward happily and safely. You remnants of the past simply need to disappear. And what of yourself? Challenged Dracula. She shifted her gaze to the snowy ground. I can adapt, she said, for I have committed no crime. But you all need to pay for yours, the same as us werewolves do. Alice turned to her wrist communicator and requested, send in a 43 skid. A what? Said the woman on the other end. Alice hissed, that means descending. Satellite with military-grade firing squad as backup. Review your codebook, Salty ma'am. Madam? Oh, botheration. See what you've done? Now Dracula knows and everything. This is how Dracula knew to look up. Above, the snowstorm dissipated, making way for a satellite larger by far than Walter Whipple's estate, quite possibly even larger than the chunk of earth and ice they called South Africa. Solar panels smothered its sides, they had sopped up sunlight for years like crackers in soup. The antenna tip in its miles-wide bowl glowed white-hot, preparing to fire a ray of light, the caliber of which none on the planet could replicate. Dracula also heard tank treads approaching from afar, no doubt carrying all the ammo they could muster. Alice asserted, tonight we settle your dues, Dracula. Aye, you and yours definitely shall, he rebuffed. He lifted both arms to the sky, fully outstretched, fingers like spines. Robert, fear not, but avert your eyes. Robert, tearful, closed them. The reason I send my friends away is that what I am about to perform is a maneuver no man nor wolf should wish to see. So you shall not. His fingers snapped, he became the mist. The snow in his approximate location whipped up into a whirl, and he let loose a wild wolven howl. A great creature went heaving across the frigid wilderness. He was no wolf, he was Bistritz, the brave bat who in today's travails had been far overtaxed. He raced past boulders the size of battleships, all nothing compared to him, and through a blizzard that seemed to have intensified. What's more, the bat now raced through a smattering of battery, the militia, come to execute Dracula. A battalion of tanks, each as small as one of his paws, fired a few rounds at his husky hull, but none did him more than a scathing. The biggest rounds were for his master. So Bistritz went on and, maugre the cold, he was panting, sweating bullets metaphorically just as much as literally. His tongue lolled as he ululated a gargantuan hoof. Hoof. Inwardly, a bewildered Adam and a ruffled Trials huddled in the dark of the cellar of Castle Dracula. Packed in suitable arrangement were thousands of barrels containing fine winery, extending in date to before the Common Era. Actually, most of it was blood. But they were in no state to think about that. This was the most secure shelter of Castle Dracula, and if things outside went too far south, they would be thankful for it. Everything thumped and rollicked, too, with the rhythm of an unsettled Bistritz. This situation doth not suit me one bit, quoth Trials. Why, land of Goshen, Adam said. The very same words sat on mine own tongue. Could our natures be closer than I thought? So predictable and yet so earnest, she said to the floor. No, Frankotep, I'm makin' fun o' you. The name is Adam. They wobbled. Then Trial said, in the voice of a game show host, I see it's a no on Walter. I just hope they save my fish dinner. Adam's eyes went saucerin. How can you be so crass, you chuffcat? He, untutored innocent, did not know, awful puns and banter are how comedians in dead-end bars speak of the dead, revere them. And Bistritz, fully horizontal, but with the speed and aspect of a desperate mountaineer, clambered to the coast of Cape Agulhas. Then he leaped into the water, for an explosion was coming that otherwise would have flung him into the ether if not torn him apart. Warm grass. Temperate ocean. A gentle mist, and nighttime rainbow stooping to earth. This was no Galapagos Isle, nor was it a dream. Well, indeed it would be the source of many penguin nightmares, having changed a comfortable ecosystem into what was, for them, surely a hellscape. But for the purposes of our story, it was beautiful. Had Adam stuck his head out of Bistrit's mouth during the chase to observe, he would have swooned. Bistritz, however, had found an underwater cave housing an air pocket. Every half hour, he rattled off more echolocation, fully confident that Master Dracula with his special ears would track them down soon. Now it was the cusp of morning. Dracula's deed had long been done. He only took time to meditate and feed. Somehow it felt wrong to suck blood mere hours after the death of a friend. For this shame, Dracula chided himself. Walter would have wanted him to preserve his health. Why should consuming the blood of his enemies diminish anything? All across a mansion in utter ruin, and beyond even that, never again to stand at attention, were bodies. The bodies of obedient werewolves, now humans, with many moons long since crushed under Dracula's pacing boothiels. Their rifles, too, were powder. Dracula had crushed Alice's golden moon, and afterward pocketed the dust. Money, after all, was a powerful thing. Her corpse was here, somewhere. And a mist passed over the bodies. Any blood in pools or corpses it passed, it slurped, saying mmm, slurp, and schlierp, myumyumyummy. Soon the blood was gone and Dracula was full, sated from sip where he stood. And he stood, mustache billowing, by the fallen satellite, which had been cut nearly in two as if by a seismic fissure. Dracula's fissure. Without warning, it snapped clean in half, producing the sound of a 1920s car running out of gas. There was one body he could not bear to visit. Robert Fishman did not possess that body. From nearby came the sound of scales and suit fabric dragged across floor and earth. Here came the man that time forgot, crawling but, fortunately, not so bloody. Dracula did not immediately turn to face Robert. He simply looked at the ground, all grass, shattered concrete, and puddles of melt. If one were to see him without knowing what had transpired, one would think his affliction was vague distraction. Robert stopped, lifting himself on his forearms. Vlad, he was panting. Let's go home. They waiting. For many seconds, Dracula did not budge. The world had warmed, but he stood frozen in grief. Then something made his bleak heart to shake. It drifted through the sky, which yet was marred by drifting debris, and landed in his hand quite delicately. He was not meant to visit Walter again, it was Walter who had come to visit him, in the form of a sneaker. With a note attached. Thanks, Drac. Looks like I won't be needing this thing anymore. You need it more than me. Don't be a loser, win that gold. For all the misfits out there. Dracula could barely read through the haze of tears. They were vampire's tears, as crimson as his irises, his heart. Hours later, Dracula found Bistritz's undersea cave. He had carried Robert here, over his shoulders, and their path to shore was a line of slow-trickling blood, from the fishman's wounds, from the vampire's face. He had zigzagged between tanks, all ruined, ruptured, and smoking by his hand. His reunion with Bistritz was that of a veteran father and his war hero child, for Bistritz too had been through the trenches today. Pride was strong between them. Despite not having seen Walter Whipple before his passing, or perhaps because of that the bat, too, was mournful. Still, the mere presence of Master Dracula and friend Robert brought some light and cheer back into Bistritz. Lucky to have such a steed, they were. On this adventure there were always new places to go, new scenes through which to scrape, to scuffle, to lose hope, to catch stars. As the castle bat flung himself from Cape Agulhas waves with a vast and drippy wing beat, another mysterious object whipped its way in, the second sneaker. Miraculously, it floated through Bistritz's innards on the hints of various tradewinds before entering the castle's ventilation system and alighting on Dracula's uninhabited sleeping coffin. The sneaker's side, though worn with the ages, retained some writing. From Count Dracula to my most gracious speedman. I am glad to announce you now have a new matching pair of running shoes. Do well not to forget, it is never too late to move forward. A word on the fate of the farm animals. Before he left, Dracula set all the animals loose from their biodome, gave each one a gift of $100 for travel expenses, and allowed them to go their own ways, to make their destinies come true. As dawn arose and the rainbow arches entered their full splendor, farm animals turned their eyes to waning stars. Grievingly they all remembered Walter Whipple, before spreading out, following paths to wherever they might lead. Into their futures.